Scarlett woke up in pain. Her head pounded as if she'd been knocked out by a hammer. She groaned and opened her eyes, one after the other. Her mind was still foggy, but she could tell that there was something wrong going on. For instance, she didn't recognize the room she was in. Scarlett wondered what had happened to her last night. She couldn't remember a single thing. In fact, it took her at least 5 minutes to recall her own name. She moaned while trying to lay on her back. She could feel the weight of her entire body, as if she took some extra kilos during the night. And there was this dull pain between her legs, as if a yelp broke out of her mouth when her arm hit something while she was trying to find a comfortable position. Something hard. Her fingers poked at it 1 time, 2 times. She just couldn't make out what it was. Therefore, Scarlett turned her head to the left and her eyes widened in disbelief. Her mind was definitely playing tricks on her, she thought. The man laying next to her on the other side of the bed could simply not be real. He didn't look real. Scarlett stared at his face that had clearly been made with the sole purpose of seducing whoever would set their eyes on it. His jaw was perfectly defined, just like the tall bridge of his nose and his thick set of eyebrows. Scarlett's breath shortened when she noticed those lashes. Man, she wished hers were that long. They sat elegantly on top of the man's cheekbones, making him seem even less realistic. She hesitantly neared her hand until her finger poked at his soft lips. Then, unexpectedly, the man's eyes flew open. Her brown pupils met his gray ones. Scarlett screamed loud enough to wake up the entire floor. She sat up on the bed at the same time as he did. She realized with horror that she wore nothing but a thin piece of lingerie that didn't leave much to the imagination. She covered her chest with both hands. Who are you? She yelled at the man's face. What are you doing in this bed, you perv? But Scarlett didn't have to wait for his answer. Suddenly, memories of last night came to her bit by bit. She remembered being with her friend Megan. It was her idea to spend the night in a hotel room, have a few drinks and watch a movie together. Well, that was the plan, but they never got to watch anything because as soon as Scarlett finished her first glass of wine, the world was already fading around her. She remembered feeling so exhausted that she had to lay down on the carpet and stare at the ceiling. Then, she heard Megan laugh, but it was different. She sounded like a different person. Scarlett was in between slumber and consciousness when the girl she considered a close friend leaned over her with the most hateful gaze plastered over her face. She said, "You will never find someone who cares for you as much as I do, Scar. Guess what? I have a surprise. I booked the most exquisite man in LA to come and spend a night with you, free of charge. They say he can literally take you to heaven just by the power of his looks, so imagine what it will feel like to have him inside you. But just in case you need a little push, I put a bit of aphrodisiac in your drink. How are you feeling already?" Scarlett didn't understand half of what Megan was saying. All she knew was that she was feeling extremely warm and needed to get off her clothes as soon as possible. She started unbuttoning her shirt while Megan eyed her with a nasty smirk. "That's it. Get naked, slut. When Austin will see these videos of you with another man, he will finally realize that you are nothing more than a cheap little..." Scarlett wanted to throw up. Those memories could not be real. Megan would never do something so cruel. Not to her. Her shoulder trembled as she ran a hand through her hair, her head pounding more than ever now. The man next to her frowned in concern. Are you all right?" Scarlett glared at him, gritting her teeth in fury. Megan hired that disgusting bastard to sleep with her while she was unconscious. She didn't care that his gray eyes were as captivating as a spell. Beauty didn't make him less than a monster. She grabbed the first thing that came in hand. Unfortunately, it was only a pillow. Scarlett used it to hit the man numerous times, punctuating each stroke with an angry snarl. "You fucking rapist! You took advantage of me! I will make you rot in jail! Just you wait! I'm going to the police as soon as I'm done with you!" Scarlett gasped when the man grabbed the pillow when she tried to hit him again. He effortlessly managed to take it from her and toss it across the room. She shivered in fear when his eyes became as cold as steel. His voice was low when he spoke. "It was all you last night, princess. You were all over me, so eager to get screwed. I never forced you. I didn't have to. You were not unconscious while it happened. You can go anywhere you want, but you won't ever prove that I raped you because that's just not what happened." "All right, son of a..." Scarlett bit her lower lip, her whole body shaking with anger and shame. She realized that the man wasn't wrong. She couldn't remember what happened with him, but clearly she was not forced. There was no sign of resistance on her. If she went to the police, she'd only make a fool of herself. But what would happen then? Was there really nothing she could do after getting in the cruel trap that her friends set for her? Hot tears coated Scarlett's cheeks. For the first time, she noticed the blood stains on the bed, and it made her cry even harder. That explained the pain between her legs. She'd never been with a man before. Her first time was with a disgusting male escort. He took away her innocence and would remain unpunished because she could not prove any of the wrong that had been done to her. The man followed her eyes and also noticed the blood on the sheets. Of course, he'd felt that she was a virgin last night. Seeing her break like that in front of him softened his gaze. He didn't know how to react. He opened his mouth but struggled to let out the words that hung on the tip of his tongue. Finally, he said, "Look, I'm sorry, okay? I didn't know. Even if you took all the initiatives last night, I'm still willing to take my responsibilities." Scarlett let out a dry laugh. Take responsibility. What did that actually mean coming out of the mouth of a male escort? What? You're going to give me back my virginity? He frowned. She didn't give him the time to respond. Just get the hell out of this room now, or I swear to God, I will kill you with my bare hands. He didn't need to be told twice. He jumped out of bed and picked up his clothes as calmly as he could. He took the time to put them on despite the murderous glare that Scarlett was throwing in his direction. He then took a business card out of his jeans pocket and handed it to her. "If you change your mind, you can call me. I mean what I say, princess." Scarlett snatched the business card and tore it into pieces right in front of him. "Get out," she said through gritted teeth, pointing at the door. The man took a deep breath. He saw the suffering in her eyes and knew she wouldn't hear anything he had to say. So, he walked away. As soon as he was out of the hotel room, he heard the woman cry like a child behind closed doors. For some reason, it made his heart ache. He'd never been one to feel any kind of emotion. And yet, he forced himself to leave and took the elevator to the ground floor. He walked out of the hotel, hands plunged deep in his jeans pockets. When he passed the glass entry door, he looked straight at the clear blue sky and took a deep breath in. That's when two men dressed in dark suits approached him, severe looks plastered on their faces. "Sir." They greeted him in unison. The man tore his gaze off of the sky and started walking straight ahead, his two bodyguards following at a close distance. "That girl," he said. "Yes, sir. Gather all available information about her immediately, and report to me as soon as possible." "Yes." When a dark Range Rover stopped next to them, the man got in, and his bodyguards closed the door behind him. Scarlett couldn't tell how long she cried in the hotel room. In the end, she had no more tears left. She whimpered, but her cheeks remained dry after she'd wiped them earlier. It angered her that she could not even pour her anger out anymore. She stood up on wobbly legs and waited for the blood to flow in them after she stayed in the same position for so long. She didn't dare look at the messy bed. She would really throw up if she was to see the bloodstains on her sheets again. Instead, Scarlett made her way to the bathroom, swaying on her feet like a drunkard. She held onto the wall to not fall and turned on the light. It almost blinded her. She was immediately met by her own reflection on the mirror above the sink. "Ugh, no," she whined, her right hand covering her mouth as she stared at her disheveled hair, the traces of mascara that smudged under her eyes and the see-through nightdress that barely hung on her thin shoulders. She did look cheap. Scarlett came closer and held on to the sink. She turned her head slightly to one side and then to the other. Her neck was littered with love bites and they looked sickening. "No, this is not me," she snarled. "This cannot be me." Yet it was. With each passing second, Scarlett convinced herself that indeed, the woman in the mirror was her, as shameful that was. She burst into tears again and was surprised to see that she still had some left, after all. She walked into the shower and turned on the water. She made it hot enough to burn her skin. If only she could peel it all off. She smeared herself with soap and scrubbed hard. She couldn't even feel the pain. The disgust was greater than anything else. She scrubbed until she bled, the water turning pink when she rinsed herself off. Somehow, she still felt dirty, so she repeated the process again and again until she could no longer hold her arms up. Then, Scarlett wrapped herself in a towel and returned to her bedroom. She tore her sheets off of the bed and put them in a huge pile with her nightdress. She decided that she'd burn it all later. Scarlett picked the cloth she wore last night. It was a short dress that didn't seem appropriate to wear after what she went through, but she had no other choice. She slipped it on and let her hair down, too mad to even think of tying it up. Her phone, keys, and a bit of cash were thrown into her purse before she rushed out of the hotel. Scarlett hailed a taxi and got in, giving the address of Megan. Her feet trembled all throughout the ride. She had no idea what she was going to do once she'd see her. She had no plans and didn't have the ability to think of one. All she knew was that she needed to understand. Why would someone so close to her do this? Why would Megan out of everyone else? After all they went through together, when the taxi dropped her off, Scarlett stood in front of her friend's apartment complex for a few minutes before she made her way inside. She knocked at her door and waited anxiously for someone to come. She was about to knock again when the door flew open and Scarlett's confused eyes met those of Megan's mother. The strangest thing about her was not that she was wearing a nightrobe at midday. It was the look of pure horror on her face, as if Scarlett was the last person she wanted to see. As if there was something she was hiding. "Oh, hello, Scar," she said, passing a hand through her hair. What brings you here?" She was sweating like a pig. Scarlett narrowed her gaze down on her. "I'm here to see Megan, of course." "Is she here?" Oh no. "I'm so sorry, dear, but Megan left very early this morning." "She's not around. Maybe. You could come back later in the after." "Ah!" Scarlett pushed past Megan's mother, hitting her hard against her shoulder. Luckily, she knew the house better than anyone. She walked straight down the hallway, screaming as loud as she could. "Megan, come out, you fucking bitch! Come out, wherever you are!" Her mother was right behind Scarlett. "What are you doing, Scar? I told you, Megan is not here. You have to leave now." Scarlett was aiming for Megan's bedroom door, but she passed in front of her mother's first. The door was slightly ajar, and through the corner of her eyes, the young woman had seen something. Something that made her stop abruptly. "Scar!" The woman said with a trembling voice. "Scar, leave now." But of course, Scarlett wasn't going to obey. She bursted into the mother's bedroom, and immediately a strong smell of liquor and sex hit her nose. She covered it with a hand while she looked at the man standing half naked by the bed. She couldn't believe her own eyes. "Dad?" she said, her voice laced with disbelief, no doubts. It was the sheepish form of her dad, so out of place inside another woman's bedroom. "Dad," she repeated, this time with more anger. The man frowned, his back straightening. Scarlett watched his father's face turn crimson red. "How did you end up here? Why are you inside this woman's room half naked?" "Dad, there must be an explanation. I have nothing to say." Scarlett, it was like her heart was taken out of her chest and thrown against a wall. Scarlett opened her mouth, but no words came out of it. What was there to say anyway? The things she was seeing were pretty much self-explanatory. Her father pointed an accusatory finger in her direction. You pounce in here like the devil. Don't you have any respect? It's your fault if you walked into this. Scarlett let out a dry laugh. She then turned to look at Megan's mother. The latter was leaning against the door, staring back at her with cold eyes. I tried to stop you, she stated. The young woman looked between them, still unable to believe that the scene unfolding in front of her was actually real. Never in her life could she have guessed that his father would have an affair with no other than Meg's mom. They lived in completely different worlds. She found it quite ironic that she came to deal with her issues regarding Meg and found a problem with her mom as well. Listen, the latter said. It's not what it looks like, Scar. You might have misunderstood. But there is absolutely nothing between me and your father. We just... Shut up! Scarlett interrupted. Just shut up if you are going to lie. There is nothing going on between you, but the man is standing butt naked in your room. What else is there to know? Scar, her father yelled. Number you shut up too. I'm so sick of this. Like mother, like daughter, right? You're both disgusting. You had your eyes set on my dad for how long, huh? The same amount of time that Meg fucking wanted my fiancé to. Scarlett shook with anger. You are both sluts, and I hope you rot in hell. Just then, someone came running down the hallway. All three eyes in the room converged to look at the newcomer, who was no other than Megan herself. She was out of breath, but her burning eyes set on Scarlett. First of all, what are you doing in our home? And why are you calling my mother a slut? Scarlett fisted her hands. She'd never thought that she would one day be capable of murder. But in that instance, all she wanted was to wrap her hands around Megan's neck and squeeze all the life out of her. Both of them challenged each other with their eyes. Scarlett realized that her friend had never been truthful with her. She never cared about her the way she swore many times before. Now, she couldn't hide her true face, and it was indeed an ugly one. All Scarlett could see in her was her envy and the evil that lurked behind her eyes. You came right on time, she exclaimed, throwing her hands in the air. Maybe you can explain what I just walked into. Something tells me you always knew that your mom was screwing my dad, but you never thought I deserved to know. What else are you hiding from me? Megan. It seems like I don't know you at all. I mean, you set me up with a stranger last night to rape me so clearly. I don't know you. Megan's mother widened her eyes in shock. Scarlett wondered what her father's reaction was, but she wasn't going to turn around and check for herself. She wasn't going to break eye contact with Megan first. The latter was just staring back at her, without saying a word. Her mother faced Scarlett. What are you talking about? What do you mean? Set you up. My daughter would never do that. You had a one-night stand with a man and you want to blame Meg for it. Meg, say something. But Megan was being too quiet, her face turning crimson red. Scarlett couldn't stand her anymore. She raised her hand and slapped her across the face as hard as she could. The sound rang in the air for a few seconds after it happened. Megan had stumbled a few steps back, holding her cheek with a look of astonishment and pain. Everyone was silent and shocked for a while until Megan's mother held on to Scarlett's wrist and squeezed. You. How dare you hit my daughter inside our home? She raised her own hand to return the slap, but Scarlett didn't wait for it. She was blinded by rage, and it was slowly taking over her entire reasoning. She acted before thinking and pushed Megan's mother back with all her strength. The woman wasn't expecting it. She let out a tiny noise before she fell. They watched her body painfully hit the ground and her head banged into the corner of a table that was in the way. Megan screamed, looking at the stern body of her mother, drops of blood seeping out of the wound on the back of her head. She rushed and kneeled in front of her, but too scared to touch. Mom? Oh my God, Mom, can you hear me? Shit. Scarlett blinked repeatedly. She didn't know what to do with herself. She fisted her hands, staring at the woman whose eyes didn't focus on anything in particular. Suddenly, her father pushed her out of the way to kneel next to Megan's mother. Carefully, he raised her upper body and rested it on his thighs. His hand held onto the back of her head, and she moaned in pain. Scarlett watched with horror. It was odd to see the care and attention her own father was showing to an estranged woman. "Joyce," he said in a whisper. "Joyce, what's wrong, honey? Honey." Scarlett would have laughed if the situation wasn't literally blowing her mind away. Megan's mother looked at her father and smiled. Megan, on the other hand, was up on her feet again. She pointed a finger towards Scarlett. "You hurt my mom. Your problem is with me. Why did you have to get her involved? She could have died. For God's sake." "Meg, stop," the woman whimpered out. I'm fine, please. Don't blame Scarlett. She is clearly out of her mind today." Both mother and daughter shared a look. Scarlett noticed how it seemed like they were silently communicating with each other. Then, Megan turned to the man kneeling with her mom and spoke words that made Scarlett understand that her nightmare was only beginning. "Why are you so quiet, Dad? You saw what she did, didn't you? Until when are you going to stay quiet and pretend that everything is fine? Until when are Mom and I going to be wronged and put after the only daughter you recognize?" Scarlett chuckled. All eyes converged toward her. She looked insane, and now Megan was actually terrified of her. She took a step back when Scarlett pointed her murderous glare at her. "Did I just hear you say Dad?" Despite her fear, Megan held her head high. "You heard me. Right." She then turned to the man, who was still kneeling on the floor, even though Meg's mother had recovered enough to sit on her own. Holding her head, "Dad, I'm sick of being an illegitimate child. Okay. Now is your chance. You have to tell the truth so we can all rest. There is no way out of this anymore." The man stood. Both of his daughters were looking at him. He knew it was true. He couldn't run away anymore. When he spoke, he made sure to not meet Scarlett's eyes. "Listen, honey. It's true. Megan is actually your sister." He dared to throw a glance toward her. Scarlett's face was void of any sort of emotion. Somehow, it made the father upset, and his voice rose. "Don't look at me like that. Okay, I tried to keep this from you because I didn't want you to suffer. But you give me no choice. You came here and burst into the room without even. Well, it doesn't matter anyway. You had to find out one way or another. The thing is, I have been seeing Joyce for a while now. It started before I even married your mother. We broke up at that time, but I didn't know that she was pregnant. I met Megan a few years later, but I just couldn't say anything to you or to your mother, so I kept it a secret. But all I ever wanted, Scar, was to tell you about your sister. This is not how I wanted things to go, and you might feel like you have been wronged, but put yourself in Meg's shoes. She had to live as an illegitimate daughter. You had all the privileges she could only dream of. You cannot be angrier than her right now." The man took a few steps forward. Scarlett was frozen like a statue, and she didn't attempt to speak, not even once. So her father took a deep breath and smiled awkwardly. "I see you are taking this rather well, Scar. Good. Now that you know the truth, we can start a new chapter of our lives. Together, we can now become a family." "Stop." Scarlett wrapped her arms around herself. "What's wrong? Family, you say? With these women, never, Dad. You have to stop being selfish, Scarlett." "Selfish? Is that what you call someone who doesn't want to be related to a woman who didn't hesitate to set her up with a man out of jealousy?" "I don't know, Dad." "Are you sure that you're my father? You just sound like a complete stranger right now." "Lies won't get you out of this situation, Scarlett. I'm telling you, from now on Meg and her mom are you family. You will call them sister and mother. I will die first before I let those words out of my mouth. Do you hear me?" Joyce approached, putting a gentle hand on Scarlett's father's shoulder. She said to him in a soft voice, "Please don't force her. If she doesn't want to, it's still okay. We have lived all this time without her. I'm sure we can go on for a bit longer. Give her time." Scarlett rolled her eyes at the woman's show of kindness, as if she cared about her well-being. How could her father be blind enough to not see the sly look on her face? How could he not know that they were taking advantage of him? Scarlett gritted her teeth together. She was stupid to still care about her father after all he'd done. "It doesn't matter," he spat out with anger in his voice. "Acting like a spoiled little brat won't change the fact that Megan is your sister, Scarlett. You must accept it whether you like it or not. And now that you are aware of the whole story, Megan and her mother must come and live with us. There is no point in staying separated." Scarlett gasped in shock. The sly smirks on Megan and her mother's face made her sick. "Never," she yelled. "That house belonged to my mother. I won't allow you to bring strangers in there, Dad. You will have to cross over my dead body before you do it, believe me. That house belongs to me, young lady. Yeah, only after my mother died. And I won't let you do this disgusting thing. I won't let you take these war." Scarlett received an unforgiving slap on her right cheek. It wasn't painful because what hurt the most was knowing that her gentle father dared to slap her for the sake of someone else. Her eyes filled with tears as she glared at him. "You hit me because of these women?" The father didn't reply. He clutched his trembling hand, and Scarlett could tell that he regretted his actions, but it was too late. She sprinted out of the door and didn't stop when the man called her name. She burst into tears as soon as she was inside the elevator, her heart aching so much that she feared it was truly broken. She came to confront Megan about her rape, but never even got to it. Instead, she broke the relationship she had with her father and found herself a complete orphan. She lost both of her parents. Scarlett walked out of the building, half crying and shaking her head in confusion. It occurred to her that Megan had ruined her life in barely a few hours by stealing her virginity and her father. She wondered if it had always been her goal since the beginning of their friendships. Had she approached her that first time with the sole purpose of ruining her existence? Scarlett was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't notice the dark vehicle that suddenly shrieked and stopped not too far away from her. The man on the back seat was quick to jump out. He watched the young lady bump into a couple of people that were walking the opposite direction. She didn't even bother to apologize. It was as if she was stuck in her own bubble and the outside world had become invisible to her. The man ran after Scarlett and held her arm. "Hey!" She turned around and frowned when she recognized the man from earlier, the male escort she woke up next to in the morning. He had a concerned look on his face, but Scarlett knew better than to believe he actually cared about her. "Don't touch me," she hissed, snatching her arm away from his grasp. "What happened?" he asked. He reached out in his jacket and took a handkerchief out. Scarlett refused to accept it. "Tell me what happened," the man insisted. "I might be able to help you. Look, if this is about this morning." "Yes, you son of a bitch. It's about this morning, and it's also about what just happened to me. And you know what? There is nothing you can do for me, and even if you could, I will never accept any sort of help coming from a male escort." Scarlett could have spit on his face, but she decided against it. She didn't notice the way the man's bodyguard looked at her, their hands resting over their weapons and waiting for a single order from their boss. But the man didn't say anything. "Sir, let her go," he sighed, watching the woman walk away. So much anger in her, he wondered why he wanted to help her so badly. She was just a woman among so many others after all. He'd already tried being kind twice. It was more than enough generosity. "Let's just go to the company," he ended up saying to his men before returning inside the car. But the thoughts of Scarlett didn't leave his mind on the way, not even a bit. Last evening, the upper management at Globex Corporation had received a surprising email. It stated that their new CEO was coming in the morning for a special visit. It was strange because since the creation of the company, the employees at Globex never met their CEO and didn't even know what his real name was. They all arrived at the office earlier than usual and busied themselves with different tasks just to make everything look perfect for the arrival of the boss. They all wondered why he suddenly decided to show up after all that time. Rumors had it that he lived in Europe and was leading another company there. Deciding to come to New York just like that without prior notice was odd to say the least, especially knowing that the business was doing well and that there was nothing to monitor. The CEO was known to be a mysterious person. He'd founded Globex 3 years ago with a starting capital of over $1 million, which was quite impressive, coming from a young entrepreneur. It wasn't surprising that people couldn't stop talking about the company then, and it was still ongoing. As it grew, the CEO brought additional funds of $10 million, which helped to build Globex's current building, which was the tallest in New York City. A visual proof of the company's success. In just 2 years, the company had managed to beat every other competition in the industry. It expanded into many other areas, including real estate, finance, cinema, and other entertainment. Globex had its presence in the most profitable markets, to say the least, and still, the identity of the man behind it all was a complete mystery. The company's executives were anxiously waiting for his arrival in the meeting room. They whispered to each other like excited children, sharing their opinions on what the CEO looked like or what the purpose of his visit was. At exactly 10 o'clock he arrived. They heard him before he appeared, his slow steps echoing throughout the corridor. Every executive in the room glued their eyes to the door until it was pushed open, and in came the CEO's personal assistant, accompanied by a much younger man. He was very tall and slender. His designer suit fit him perfectly, slightly outlining the curves of his arm muscles. The silence in the room was almost palpable as he made his way to the head of the meeting table and introduced himself. "Good morning, everyone. My name is Reich Mendez, and I am the CEO of Globex Corporation. I am honored to finally make your acquaintance." The greetings rose, hesitant at first and more confident after a few seconds. With all the speculations, none of the executives had guessed that the boss was actually that young. Someone so powerful and wealthy was of course assumed to be a middle-aged man, at least, but Reich was far from everyone's expectation. In a good way, he sat down for a quick meeting. He made his employees comfortable by asserting that he wasn't putting pressure on them. He just wanted a quick overview of the company's state and the next steps they were going to take to reach the year's objectives. The executives felt comfortable speaking to their boss, as he was very understanding and not harsh with his words. The entire meeting lasted around 30 minutes before they were allowed to return to their activities. Reich shook hands with a few of them and thanked them for the words of encouragement. Soon enough, he was left alone with his personal assistant, Mr. Goldwyn. The man sat down next to the young CEO. "I think you made a great first impression, sir," he commented. "Even though you have perfectly managed the company while you were abroad, I believe things can only improve now that you are back in New York. Your family will be delighted." Mr. Goldwyn jolted when he met the harsh look of the CEO. "My family will not find out about my return," he stated in a strict voice. "Excuse me, sir. You heard me. I do not want them to know, but I thought that the whole purpose of this trip and visiting the company was because you wanted to settle in New York once and for all. How can that be without telling your family? Your parents, at least. Why hide it?" Reich's jaw clenched as he responded. "Believe me, Mr. Goldwyn, it will bring more harm than good if they were to know. My brothers would be all over my back. You know that. They won't give me a second of peace." Reich hated to speak about his brothers, who he considered to be his worst enemies. Rivalry and competition were the only relations they had to each other. One of the reasons why Reich went abroad in the first place was because he was sick of the acting games they all played, pretending to be one happy family when in reality, they were at war. All they wanted was to take over their family's fortune and selfishly keep it to themselves. For years, Reich pretended to be the dumb brother, the one who only cared about having fun, doing drugs and sleeping around. In reality, it was just a suit he put on to confuse his brothers while he worked on building his own empire on the side. "Sir, your father is sick." Mr. Goldwyn spoke pleadingly. "At least he should know about your presence. Maybe you can pay him a visit at the hospital, discreetly of course so your brother won't find out." Reich frowned, considering his assistant's words. Of course, seeing his father again was one of the motivating factors that brought him back, but he needed to have a plan before meeting him. "I will see what I can do," he said. The assistant was about to add something when Reich's phone began to ring. He saw one of his men's name and picked up immediately. "Yes, sir. We have gathered all the information about the woman from last night. And what did you find? Her name is Scarlett Devons, and she isn't just anybody. We found that she is actually engaged to no other than Austin Miller. All the details of their relationship has been forwarded to you by email. Please have a look and let us know if there is anything else we can do." "All right, thank you." Reich hung up and a bitter laugh escaped his lips. His assistant watched him curiously but didn't say anything. The young CEO was completely lost in his thoughts. After all, the name Austin Miller wasn't one he had not been prepared to hear so soon, and not in such circumstances. He knew there was something about that woman. Something told Reich that she was going to be a valuable asset to him. And now, he was certain of it. Scarlett wandered around New York City for hours. Her head felt like it was going to burst, and she truly believed that she was losing her mind. Clearly, everyone she passed on the road was thinking the same as she got pitiful gazes from people, taking in her tearful face and her arms wrapped around her in a pathetic attempt to bring herself some comfort. Now that she'd lost everything in a single day, Scarlett was starting to wonder if her life meant anything at all. Who was she without her father, without her fiancé Austin? She was nobody. Her entire existence depended on others. And now that they were gone, she was set for doom. She couldn't see a single way out of her situation. The sky was taking shades of pink and purple as the sun started to set behind tall skyscrapers. The roads were packed with cars and New Yorkers rushed left and right to get home or hang out in bars. Scarlett stood in the midst of that chaos, not knowing what to do with herself. Going home wasn't an option. Obviously. She didn't want to run into her dad again. He didn't even bother to give her a call or text to see if she was doing okay. She really didn't exist for him anymore. Scarlett wouldn't be surprised if he was already busy moving Megan and her mother into their family home. No, she really couldn't return there. Another option could be to go to her other friend's house, Charlotte. The idea brought a little smile to her face, but it quickly faded away as she remembered that Charlotte was out of town. Plus, she didn't trust any of her friends anymore. It would take her some time to get over what Megan had done to her. Scarlett decided to walk around again, and maybe that would help her figure out her next move. She passed in front of a restaurant and heard her stomach beg for food. She hadn't eaten anything all day long. The smell of grilled steak and roasted potatoes made her salivate. Now that her mind had been distracted by food, she came to realize that the neighborhood she was in was very familiar. She used to come here often with her parents. That was before her mother's death. Of course, they'd dine out at least twice a week. Those were the happy times. Following the lead of her memories, Scarlett found her favorite restaurant at the end of the street. It hadn't changed much, and being in front of it reminded her of sweet memories, memories of her mother. A smile tugged at the corner of her lips when she noticed that the restaurant was part of a luxurious hotel. It was like a sign that the universe was handing her. She could eat and stay here for the night. Scarlett walked in, scanning the restaurant with careful eyes. There were a lot of people there, and she searched for an empty table in the dining room. When her gaze fell on the bar, at the other end of the restaurant, a gasp escaped her lips. She'd just met the eyes of someone she really wasn't expecting to run into again. Megan was clearly not done ruining her day. Scarlett took a step back, hoping to walk out of the restaurant without being seen, but it was a lost hope. Megan had already spotted her, and the surprised expression on her face was quickly replaced by a sly smirk, knowing that she just won another opportunity to humiliate Scarlett. She was drinking cocktails at the bar with her mother, but now she'd found something more entertaining to do. Megan took her glass and walked toward Scarlett, swaying her hips left and right and her black dress hugging perfectly the shape of her body. Well, she laughed. If it's not Scarlett Devons. What the fuck are you doing here? Scarlett said between gritted teeth. I should ask you that question. I was here before you. And if I didn't know better, I'd say that you're following me. Scarlett fisted her hands. A few people in the restaurant were already throwing curious glances toward them. She felt so emotionally exhausted. She didn't think it was worth it to start another scandal here, yet Megan didn't seem to share her opinion on that. Dad invited us to eat out, she sighed, looking at her manicured nails. You know, after the way you treated us earlier, we needed to relax and get our minds off of things. I think Dad will be very upset when he finds out that you followed us all the way here to torment us some more. And we invited Austin as well. He should be here soon. Maybe you can stay and say hi to him when he arrives. Scarlett's eyes filled with tears. She really didn't want Megan's words to seep into her heart, but she couldn't help it. They hit her hard. Her father was taking his other family to the same restaurant she used to go with her mother. Even her fiancé was no longer on her side. Just fuck off, okay? She said in a soft voice, too broken to scream. But I'm not done yet, Scar. I haven't told you the best news. Guess what? We are moving in with Dad tomorrow. Do you think he will let me take your room? Scarlett cringed, feeling the burn of rage at the pit of her stomach. Megan saw the glint of it in her eyes and she laughed, leaning closer to Scarlett and whispering, Shit, Scar. What are you going to do? I took your dad, your home and your man within the span of a single day. How do you cope? Of course, Megan was hoping to pull a reaction out of her, and she almost got it, but Scarlett decided to swallow her anger in the end, and she turned on her feet. She was not going to fight against Megan anymore. Someone as shameless as her didn't deserve half of her time. She started walking out of the restaurant, but Megan, who couldn't stand the humiliation, yelled after her, Don't you want to know why Austin gave up on you? Scarlett didn't know why those words made her stop in her tracks. She knew that Megan was only trying to hurt her, and she was letting her do it like an idiot. But she was so hurt that Austin wasn't taking her calls anymore, and she didn't know why. What had Megan told him to destroy their relationship? What could have possibly convinced him so much that he didn't even try to hear Scarlett's side of the story? Before giving up on her, the restaurant grew quiet as everyone's gaze turned to them, waiting for Megan's next words. I told him what kind of slut you are, Scar. I told him that you slept with men while being in a relationship with him. I told him that you had plenty of abortions, and man, he was so pissed. I'd never seen him like that before. And with the proof I showed him, he had no choice but to believe and turn to me for comfort. Scarlett spun around slowly to look at Megan's despicable face. It was a mix of smug pride and hatred. Don't look at me like that, she said. This is what you deserve. All right, you and your mother are the one who stole from us first. Your mother took my dad away, and you thought I would let it happen without doing anything. Wrong. I'm only giving you your payback. I've taken your man as well, but I'm not going to stop there. I will take everything from you, including your last name. Everything that belongs to you now will be mine. Just you wait and see. I will destroy you, bit by bit. This is only the beginning. Scarlett couldn't hold it in anymore. She'd reached a point of hatred she'd never reached before. She rushed back toward Megan, grabbed her shoulders and headbutted her. The entire restaurant gasped. Megan screamed in pain and Scarlett held on to her forehead. She'd hoped to break her fucking nose, but to her greatest despair, Megan was relatively fine. The worst she'd get would be a bump on her forehead. The next morning, "Ow, what's wrong with you?" Megan screeched. "I will kill you." Scarlett breathed out in a low tone. "I will fucking kill you, bitch." And she really wanted to. She would have wrapped her hands around her neck and squeezed the life out of her if it wasn't for the angry voice that boomed behind her. "Scarlett." Scarlett turned around and saw that Austin had arrived, and he'd seen her in the worst way possible. Her heart sank in the pit of her stomach at the sight of her fiancé's disappointed face. "What are you doing?" he asked her. Her mouth fell open, but no words came out of it. Really, what was she doing? Scarlett looked into Austin's eyes and felt like burying herself deep in the ground. She was living the worst day of her life, but no amount of torment she went through earlier could compare to that moment when the man she loved eyed her with disgust and disappointment. A whimper broke out of her. She wanted to say something, anything that could make that look on Austin's face go away. But the longer she stood there, the more she became convinced that it was a lost cause. She knew her fiancé was stubborn, and he'd obviously made up his mind about her already. Walking into her acting like a beast in the middle of the restaurant didn't help to save her case either. "Let me explain." She breathed out nonetheless, tears pooling in her eyes. Scarlett made a step forward and gasped when Austin moved out of her way to avoid her touch, as if she was too dirty to even look at. "Austin." She saw Megan move from the corner of her eyes. She walked to Austin and held on to his arm. Scarlett cringed at the sight of the bitch touching her fiancé. Megan had a pitiful look on her face as she said, "Listen to her, Austin. You're being too harsh. Give her a chance to explain at least." She forced a pitiful gaze on her face, pretending to be selfless enough to defend Scarlett. She was the only one who could see right through Megan's game. Venom dripped out of her, and she wondered why everyone else was so blind to it. "What could she possibly say to me?" Austin's angry voice rang. "You slept with another man. She set me up." Scarlett replied. "You're lying." Scarlett's tears wetted her cheeks. The sharp words were as deadly as daggers. She stared at Austin and wondered where her kind fiancé had gone. They dated for 4 years. 4 years gone in the wind as if they never even existed. Had he forgotten about all her sacrifices? All the pain she went through for him? A few years back, Austin had been involved in a terrible car accident that didn't end his life, but left him with an injured leg. His condition was so severe that many thought he'd never recover and would end up crippled. Scarlett recalled those long sleepless nights when she had to stay by his side at the hospital. Even his family didn't get invested in his health as much as she did. She took him to the best doctors and clinics in New York, even if it meant putting her own life on hold for a while. She prepared his meals herself, took him to every single rehabilitation treatment, held him as he cried every night. She'd been there with him every step of the way, and now, when she needed him the most, he was gone. The least he could do was give her a chance to explain. But who was she fooling anyway? If her father could abandon her, it shouldn't be so surprising to see anybody else do the same. The said father was standing by the door with his eyebrows drawn closer to the bridge of his nose. He spoke. "I see it wasn't enough for you to cause trouble at home. You had to come here and do the same again in public." "Dad." Megan jumped in. "Please, you must speak to her." "I begged her, but she doesn't want to hear anything I have to say. Scar is set on not coming home if we are going to be there. Please try to convince her." If Scarlett wasn't already so broken, she'd have laughed at Megan's fake acts of kindness. But her father's next words were enough to strip her of all her desire to laugh. "Well, Scarlett, it doesn't matter to me anymore. If you don't want to come home, you don't have to. Do as you please." Scarlett blinked at her father's words. She felt numb all of a sudden, as if she'd been hurt so much that she could no longer feel the pain. Her eyes moved from her father to Austin. to Megan. They were all unrecognizable. They were nothing more than strangers, lost in her thoughts. She hadn't noticed a bunch of security guards walking into the restaurant with one of the hotel's managers. The middle-aged man stood in front of them and spoke in a cold voice. "May I know what the issue is here?" Austin turned to the manager and pointed a finger towards Scarlett. "We apologize for the noise, sir. The thing is, this woman came in here and made a fuss. I can assure you that we played no part in this scandal. Please, we would like it very much if you escort her outside of the hotel so we can have our meal in peace." The manager looked at Scarlett, who'd wrapped her arms around her, shivering with shame and heartbreak. Her fiancé was literally asking for her to be kicked out. It hurt, of course, but maybe she was hoping that the guards would obey to that request. She didn't think that she had the strength to walk herself out of the restaurant. Yet, to her greatest surprise, the manager didn't ask for security to take her out. Instead, he returned his attention to Austin. "Sir, I must ask you to leave." Austin's eyes widened, as well as Scarlett's father's and Megan's. "Excuse me?" "You heard me, sir. We have been a witness to everything that happened here, and it seems to us that this young woman has done nothing but defend herself after being humiliated by this other lady's words. Now, our establishment doesn't tolerate certain behavior, and you do not fit the type of customers that we intend to serve here, which is why we must ask you to leave at once." "This must be a joke," Scarlett's father exclaimed. "May I remind you that I have always been a loyal customer to this hotel. You cannot throw me and my family out of here. I demand to speak to your manager." "I'm the manager, sir." "Then call your damn boss." "My boss is the one who specifically demanded that you leave this restaurant now." They all frowned. Scarlett didn't know much about what was going on, but seeing the shock that passed through her father's and fiancé's face, she could tell that they knew exactly who the boss was. And in fact, the Drunken Moons Hotel was one of the many enterprises under Globex Corporation. What surprised Austin and Scarlett's father was that its unknown CEO was said to be abroad. But clearly that wasn't the case anymore. They paled, knowing that someone that powerful was against them. They tried to hide it, but fear was evident in their eyes. The security guard encircled them, and their group had no choice but to walk toward the exit, including Megan's mother. Scarlett followed behind them, but the manager was quick to stop her. His expression softened when he spoke. "Please follow me, ma'am. We have prepared a private booth for you upstairs for your dinner, and then we will check you into one of our best rooms for the night." "Me?" Scarlett pointed at her chest, surprised by the sudden turn of events. Megan turned around and pushed away the guard who was guiding her out of the door. She hollered, her voice shaking with anger. "So you are kicking us out, but you will let her stay. How is that fair?" "It's a special request from the boss, ma'am," the manager said. Megan and Austin shared a look. They didn't have to say a word to each other. They already knew they were thinking the same thing. Why was the CEO of Globex Corporation taking care of Scarlett? They would have loved to find out, but the guards were nudging them again out of the restaurant. This time with more urgency. They cursed and protested, embarrassed in front of everyone. When they were gone, the manager called one of the last security guards and told him, "Make sure that those people are not allowed here ever again." The guard nodded and left, mumbling something in his earpiece. Scarlett followed the manager up the stairs under the gaze of the entire restaurant, where whispers started to raise. She knew for sure that all the conversations were about her. While going up, many questions flashed through her mind. She was being protected by a complete stranger, and she had no idea why. Could her day become any more strange? The booth where she was led to was probably the most expensive inside the restaurant. She could literally see herself in the clean marble floor, and the decoration looked more expensive than her entire belongings. The table was made of bocote wood, for God's sake. Even though she'd grown up in wealth, Scarlett was still not used to that much. She'd never been to a private restaurant booth before, and this one exceeded all of her expectations. She sat on one of the leather cushions, and a waitress handed her the menu. She looked up and saw the manager smile at her. "Make yourself comfortable, ma'am," he said. "Tonight, you are one of our VIP guests, and we received specific orders to tend to all your needs. Please do not hesitate, and let me know if there is anything we can do for you." "Oh, thank you much. Who should I show appreciation to for all this? Our boss doesn't wish to reveal his identity at the moment, but I'm sure he will reach out to you when the time is right." "Oh, fine, I understand. But please thank him for me." "Of course." The manager smiled one more time, and Scarlett watched him leave the booth. Her eyes fell on the menu she held, and a little smile tugged at the corner of her lips before she suddenly burst in tears. The entire day had been hell for her, but in the end, someone had shown her some kindness. She'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be cared for, and remembering how Megan, her father, and Austin had been thrown out of the restaurant. Her cries turned to laughter again. There were many things she didn't understand about what was going on, but for the time being, Scarlett decided to relax and enjoy the luxuries around her, and rejoice in the memory of Megan's angry face as she was being escorted out by security. Whoever the boss of the Drunken Moon Hotel was, she hoped that she'd soon get the chance to thank him in person for his kindness. Megan stared at her salad, arms crossed over her chest in a sign of clear distaste. After being kicked out of the Drunken Moon Hotel, she had to go to another restaurant, right on the other side of the street with her father, mother, and Austin. They all sat gloomily, eating in silence and lost in their own minds. Not only were their pride bruised, but they couldn't help but be resentful, thinking that Scarlett was at that moment in one of the best hotels in New York, probably being pampered by the entire staff. Megan was so upset that she had a knot in her throat and couldn't bring herself to eat anything. Suddenly, all her hard work seemed to be in vain. She'd gone through thick and thin to take everything from Scarlett, but she hadn't expected this to happen. How did she get to know a powerful man like the CEO of Globex Corporation? The curiosity was almost making her go crazy. "Eat." Her mother nudged her lightly. Megan just shrugged, her moody expression only deepening. Her dad spoke, trying to cheer her up. "Don't worry, Meg. It doesn't matter that we were kicked out of there. This restaurant is much better anyway. You should taste the steak. It's absolutely divine." Megan rolled her eyes. "I don't care about the damn food, Dad. What I want to know is how Scarlett pulled this off. The bitch is not sleeping with the CEO of Globex Corporation, is she?" Megan noticed her father's hand tightening around his fork. A forced smile took over his face. "Honey, I know you are upset, but you shouldn't call her names, all right? She's your sister. She might be my sister, but I can't lie, can I? She must have slept with him. It wouldn't be the first time anyway." Megan was so used to her lies that she was starting to believe them. She knew that Scarlett was a virgin before her trap, but didn't even allow herself to think about that. Austin was sitting across from her, and he looked more upset than she was. Megan cringed, knowing that he was jealous. His feelings for Scarlett were unfortunately still very present. "I never could have expected," he complained. "Scarlett played me like a fool. All this time, she made me believe that I was the only one when she's a liar, always has been." Megan interrupted him. "But still, how did she do it? No one ever even met the man. I have been trying to book a business meeting with him, but never got a chance." "What do you mean? How?" "I will tell you. She just had to spread her legs open." "Megan," her father boomed, hitting the table with his fist. Megan knew better than to speak up again and risk upsetting her father more than he already was. "Sorry, Dad. It's just that I'm so angry at her. She got you kicked out of a restaurant, for God's sake." Her strategy worked. The father quickly forgot about her lack of respect to focus on that moment when he'd been escorted out by security. I have never been so humiliated in my life, he said. He was a known businessman, respected by all his peers. Luckily, no one he knew was present at the restaurant to witness the humiliation he went through. All because of Scarlett. Austin could relate to the older man's embarrassment. But on the other hand, Megan and her mother were quite used to it. They were not from wealthy families, and being mistreated was something that happened to them quite often. Unfortunately, they watched curiously as Scarlett's father took his phone out with a determined look on his face. "What are you doing, darling?" Megan's mother asked him. "I'm freezing all of Scarlett's credit cards," he responded. Megan sat up, a glint of excitement showing up in her eyes for the first time since they left the Drunken Moon Hotel. "You are?" She grinned. "Yes. I think I have been too lenient with her, and I must teach her a lesson. She will know that she's nothing without me. Not coming back home, huh? Let's see how she'll survive out there without my money." Scarlett's father smiled with smug pride after freezing his daughter's cards. The four of them resumed their meal with a lighter heart, now that they'd done something they believed would compensate for the humiliation they suffered. Thanks to Scarlett. And right on the other side of the street, the young woman was having a great time in the most luxurious booth of the Drunken Moon Hotel. And to believe that her day had started in tragedy, she was served with the most delectable meals. All kinds of dishes filled her table and Scarlett picked at them, each meal more delicious than the previous ones. She ate to her heart's content and sipped on sweet French wine. In that single instant, she really felt like royalty. Of course, she couldn't bring herself to finish all the food, and there was plenty of it left when she decided that she'd had enough. A few minutes later, the door opened again, and a young waitress asked if she wanted anything else. Scarlett thanked her and said that she was satiated. The waitress left and came back shortly with the same manager as earlier. "I hope dinner was to your liking, ma'am." "Oh, it definitely was." Scarlett responded with a giggle. "I have filled myself with so much food, I can barely breathe." "Good to know." The manager grinned. "If you are ready then, I will take you to one of our VIP rooms." "Sure." Scarlett followed him to the lift and her eyes widened when the manager pressed on one of the last floors of the hotel. She knew that's where the presidential suites were and that they cost a fortune, even for one night. Scarlett almost told the manager that she couldn't afford that much, but then she changed her mind. She was going to pay with her dad's money anyway. Since she was so upset with him, she believed that he deserved a punishment, and making him spend a bit of money was the least she could do. If the restaurant booth was luxurious, then the suite Scarlett was taken to was heaven itself. The door opened to a breathtaking sight of expensive furniture, and furthermore, a dreamy sight of New York City. A few young maids were just finishing with tidying up the place and greeted Scarlett on their way out. "We have prepared your bath, ma'am," the manager informed her. "Please enjoy it, and we hope it will help you relax before bed." "Really? I can't thank you enough," Scarlett said to him. "You don't need to thank me. It's only normal. If you need anything else, you just have to call reception." "Good night, Miss Devons." "All right, good night, Miss Devons." Scarlett waved at him, and the older man smiled before leaving the suite. She turned around and squealed happily, staring at the wide, lavish suite. In the room of 500 or 600 square meters, there were 2 master bedrooms as well as a study room and an entertainment space. The decor was simple but luxurious. It was definitely to Scarlett's liking. She made her way to the bathroom, where indeed, her bath was already waiting for her, and next to it, there was another bottle of old French wine, similar to the one she had for dinner. Scarlett stripped slowly out of her dress and underwear. She picked them up and set them carefully in the closet. She stood in front of the large mirror and remembered how broken she'd been in the morning, staring at a different mirror in a different hotel room. She would have never thought that her day would end like this. Her spirit was uplifted, and it eased her broken heart, even if it was just a little bit. She entered the bathtub and soaked in the warm water with rose petals and essential oils. Scarlett almost dozed off in there. She'd played some light music and drank her wine with a lazy smile on her face. Her bath lasted more than an hour before she decided that it was time to go to sleep. She wore a light robe and jumped on the bed, covered with silky sheets. She was so carefree, Scarlett had no idea that on the upper floor, there was a man sitting in his study room and thinking about her. Reich was leaning in his chair, twirling his glass of whiskey, when someone knocked and came inside. It was no other than the hotel's manager. Reich sat up and asked, "What is she doing?" "Right now, she's been taken to one of the suites, sir," the man responded. "Right now, I believe she's taking a bath or getting ready to go to bed." Was she happy? Yes. She was definitely pleased, sir. The manager raised one eyebrow when he noticed the little smile tugging at his boss's lips. It looked odd on the face of someone as cold as him. And Reich didn't even seem to notice that he was smiling. He was thinking of Scarlett's teary blue eyes as she was getting humiliated in the middle of the restaurant earlier. She really didn't deserve it after the morning she had. Reich felt the powerful need to protect her, and he couldn't explain why. There was just something about little Scarlett Devons that made him weak. Or maybe he was just feeling guilty for what he'd done to her. The memory of those blood-soaked sheets in the morning made him cringe. "Take care of her, all right," he mumbled to the manager. The man nodded, and Reich asked him to leave. He stayed alone in his half-lit study room, Scarlett occupying every inch of his mind. He saw himself the night before, his hand roaming all over her sexy little body. A shiver ran through him and he felt himself harden in his pants. He was used to the company of beautiful women, but Scarlett wasn't like any other. He felt indebted to her after taking something as precious as her virginity. Reich had to repay her somehow, even if she didn't want it. He also hoped for a chance to get to know her better in the process. Scarlett woke up the next morning at 9, and it felt like she'd slept on a cloud. She smiled and stretched her entire body before getting out of bed and opening the curtains. The sight of New York City in the morning had her frozen in awe for a few minutes. What a pleasant night she had. She really wanted to thank the owner of the Drunken Moon Hotel for what he'd done for her. If only he would let her meet him, at least for a minute. She kept thinking about it as she took a quick shower and dressed in the same clothes as yesterday. It reminded her that she would have to go do some shopping later in the day since she couldn't go home to her belongings. After a hearty breakfast, she was ready to leave and tackle the many issues she had on her plate, starting with finding an apartment. Scarlett took the elevator to the lobby. She could have easily walked out of the hotel without paying for her night. But of course she wouldn't do that. She made her way to the reception and the lady behind the counter smiled to her. "Good morning, miss." "Good morning." "Ooh, I was in one of your VIP suites, and I would like to check out now, if possible." "Oh yes, Miss Devons, is it?" "Yes. Just a second." The woman checked on her computer and printed out the bill for Scarlett. She said while handing it to her, "The dinner and breakfast this morning are free of charge. You only have to pay for the room, miss." Scarlett nodded and looked at the bill. She groaned at the sight of it. Just like she expected, it was fairly expensive. Her dad was going to kill her, but well, she opened her purse and got her credit card out. The receptionist swiped once, twice. With an embarrassed smile, she looked up to Scarlett. "Miss?" "Yes, I'm sorry, but it seems like your card is frozen. Do you have another one we can try?" Scarlett frowned but quickly fished out a different card. The receptionist tried it, but it didn't work, and neither did the 5 others she had in her purse. Slowly and with horror, Scarlett came to realize what was happening, and she gasped. Her dad really went as far as freezing all her cards, huh? "Miss," the receptionist called. Scarlett's mouth hung open. She had no idea what to do now, standing in this lobby with $1,000 bill she could not pay. The hotel boss had been kind enough to save her from further embarrassment last night, and even fed her for free. The least she could do was pay for her room. Reich walked out of the elevator with two of his men and strided toward the exit when he noticed a familiar figure standing at the reception. He immediately stopped in his tracks and squinted his eyes toward that direction. No doubt, he definitely recognized that summer dress, hugging all the curves of a familiar petite body. He chuckled, knowing that Scarlett had gotten herself in some kind of trouble again. Her shoulders were hunched under the weight of embarrassment. Reich turned to her men. "You guys go first. I have something to take care of." "Yes, sir." They left, and he walked confidently to where Scarlett stood. The receptionist was the first to see her boss approach, and her eyes widened. She was about to say something, but Reich pressed his index finger against his lips, telling her to stay quiet, and so she did. He didn't want Scarlett to know that he owned the hotel yet. Reich leaned against the counter and watched as the little woman turned her head, tugging a few blonde strands behind her ear. Shock passed through her eyes when she recognized him. "What the?" Reich turned to the receptionist. "May I know what the issue is?" "Guy." "Good morning, sir. This lady wanted to check out, but her cards are frozen." Scarlett jumped in. It's nothing to worry about. If you'll just give me a minute, I will call one of my friends who will make a transfer, and no need. I will pay for it." Scarlett raised one eyebrow at the man. "Excuse me?" Reich shrugged, his card already in hand. "Yeah, it's all right. I mean, don't you find it odd that we are meeting here again after what happened between us yesterday? If you ask me, it's a sign of destiny. The least I can do is help you out of trouble. Consider it as an apology." Scarlett considered his words. At least he felt bad about sleeping with her, but she wondered how a male escort would have the means to pay for her night in the presidential suite. She stopped him before he could give his card to the receptionist. "The thing is, it's a bit expensive. It's okay. I got this." He didn't even ask to see her bill. The receptionist tried his card and it worked immediately. Scarlett was clearly surprised, and she watched him sign a few paperworks at the counter with clear admiration. Once everything was settled, she thanked the receptionist and walked away with the guy right next to her. She didn't say anything until they passed the door and arrived on the busy street. Scarlett turned toward Reich and tugged her hair behind her ears again. She was too embarrassed to even look into his eyes. I promise. This is not a habit of mine. I don't go around sleeping in hotels and not having enough money to pay for the room." Reich smiled, and Scarlett's heart fluttered at the sight of his long dimples on each cheek. Damn, the man was breathtakingly handsome. She took the time to really look at him now, without the anger and sadness she'd felt yesterday. Not only was he good-looking, but he was also dressed in an expensive gray suit that proved how wealthy he was. He was definitely a top male escort, she told herself. It made sense as well. He had the charms. He was probably very popular among older women. "I know it's not one of your habits," he said to her. "I understand that sometimes shit happens. I just hope that you accepted my apology." Scarlett shrugged with a pout. No matter how handsome and generous he was, it seemed to her that it was too early to forgive him for stealing her virginity. Reich's smile widened. He thought she looked extremely adorable with that pout. It made him want to kiss her, but he quickly chased his thoughts away. "Do you want a ride?" he asked her instead. "A ride?" "Yes. My car is right there." Scarlett was about to refuse his offer, but she changed her mind when she remembered that all her cards were frozen. She didn't have much of a choice, did she? Ugh. All right. Odd situation again. She was actually being helped by the male escort she spent a night with. She followed him to the parking lot and gaped when Reich stopped in front of a splendid Maybach car. The kind you'd only see in movies. "Whoa!" she sighed, her finger tracing the smooth exterior of the car. "You must be loaded." Reich dismissed her words with a wave of his hand. "Not at all. I borrowed this car from a friend." Scarlett raised one eyebrow. A friend, huh? She imagined him with one of his many older girlfriends. One of them probably gave him the car. Reich opened the door for her, and she got inside. The scent of new leather took over her, and she looked around with stars in her eyes. Despite having a successful businessman as a father, she had no other choice but to admit that this car alone was more luxurious than anything she ever rode in before. Reich got in and started the car. Scarlett watched him as discreetly as she could. His veiny hands were on the wheel, and he flashed the expensive Rolex on his wrist. Scarlett took a deep breath and looked out of the window. She always had a soft spot for men behind the wheel. When they left the parking, he asked her, "Where to?" "To the quarry building, please." "Okay. Can you put the address in the GPS?" "Oh, no need. It's in Williamsburg." "Yeah, but I'm not familiar with that area." Scarlett opened her mouth, but no words came out of it. Williamsburg was one of the hyped neighborhoods in NYC filled with clubs, bars, lounges, and restaurants. It was the perfect place for someone in his profession, so how come he wasn't familiar with it? She shook her head and entered the address of Quarry Building in his GPS. The instructions began. She leaned against her seat and looked out of the window again. She already dreaded the moment she'd stand in front of her father. The Quarry Building was where his office was. Scarlett was going to confront him about her frozen cards and see how it'd go. She couldn't help but feel anxious. Never would she have believed that her father would do something like that to her, but she didn't recognize him anymore. Her father had become a completely different person since yesterday. She didn't know what he was capable of. "What are you thinking about, little lady?" Scarlett scoffed at the nickname. She looked at the smug smile on Reich's face. He was clearly happy to have her attention back. She could have told him what she was really thinking about. But there were other things that Scarlett was curious about. She wanted to know what happened the other night between the handsome male escort and Megan. How did the setup unfold exactly? Did they plan it together from the beginning? Did he know that she was being trapped? "I was thinking about that night, you and me." "Oh," Reich licked his lips. "Do you remember now?" "No, I have no memory." "I was drugged, you know that, right?" "Well, I came to realize that you were not in your right mind." "Yes, yeah. So, how much did she pay you?" "Megan, how much did she pay you to sleep with me?" Scarlett noticed the horrified look on his face. It almost seemed like he had no idea what she was talking about. And indeed, Reich laughed without humor and asked, "Who the hell is Megan?" "The girl who paid you to sleep with me." "God, stop acting stupid. It's really annoying." "Okay, I lost my virginity that night. The least you can do is be honest with me and stop fooling around. It's not funny." "I seriously have no idea what you're talking about. No one paid me anything." "Oh, okay. So a male escort would sleep with a random girl and not ask for payment. I mean, isn't that what you do for a living?" Fear washed over her when Reich's expression passed from amused confusion to pure anger. He glanced at her quickly before looking at the road again. His eyebrows frowned. "Did you just call me a man whore?" he growled. "Yeah, that's what you are." "Okay, listen. I think you are a little confused that night. I ran into you by chance. Okay, it wasn't planned. Far from that. I saw this weird guy getting into your room, and I just knew something was wrong. He didn't seem right. I followed him and saw him about to assault you. A woman drunk out of her mind. I couldn't let it happen. I beat the shit out of him and kicked him out, but you fell in my arms as soon as you saw me. I tried to help you, but, I will stop you right there, mister. At least try to make your lies a bit more convincing. In what kind of scenario does trying to help me ends with us in the same bed and my virginity gone? You were all over me. I am sorry, all right. I'm not trying to find an excuse for what I did, but I really tried to take you somewhere safe. The thing is, you were horny. That's it. I said it. You were literally begging me for sex. And damn, maybe I was a bit horny myself. I couldn't say no to a pretty girl, and I had no idea that you were a virgin. I wasn't strong enough. Oh, so I am the one who took advantage of you, is that it? I didn't say that. You know what? Thanks for the ride, sir. You can drop me off here, and I will walk the rest of the way. Shit. Why are you so damn stubborn? Just stop the car. Reich obeyed and stopped the car. Scarlett jumped out and slammed the door behind her. She walked straight, her steps heavy with anger. The vile son of a bitch. She couldn't believe that he was actually blaming her for what happened that night. No way he was telling the truth. He was nothing more than a cheap man whore, trying to lie his way out of trouble. Soon enough, she reached her father's office as it was only a few meters away. But she could tell that Reich hadn't driven away yet. In her stubbornness, Scarlett refused to look back and decided to walk into the building, but right before she did so, "Well, we meet again, Scar." Scarlett groaned at the sound of Megan's annoying voice. Was her nightmare ever going to end? Megan had just come out of a white Porsche that Scarlett recognized for having been in it multiple times, and indeed, she saw her fiancé Austin come out of the car soon after. He walked to Megan's side, and she intertwined their fingers in a loving manner. Scarlett scoffed at the sight. "Are you here to see Dad?" Megan asked her. "As sisters, we must be sharing the same thoughts because I'm here to see him as well. Should we go in together?" "You will never be my sister," Scarlett said, through gritted teeth. Megan laughed, but she was the only one. She stopped when she noticed that Austin and Scarlett were staring at each other. There was nothing that Megan hated more than being ignored. She cleared her throat and spoke again, this time with a harsher tone. "Anyway, I saw you getting out of a Maybach car just now. That belongs to Chris, am I right?" "Chris?" Austin repeated. "Who the hell is Chris?" Megan had seen a Maybach car only once prior to that day, and it belonged to Chris Montgomery. He was the eldest son of the Montgomery family, and the older brother of Charlotte who, without any surprise, was one of Scarlett's friends. Chris had recently become an affluent entrepreneur, and he'd managed to expand the wealth of his family in only a few years. No wonder he was one of the most eligible bachelors in the state. Megan's eyes widened when she suddenly thought of something. Maybe it was through Chris that Scarlett knew the CEO of Globex Corporation. After all, the eldest Montgomery son was renowned for his partnerships with influencing businessmen. That would explain why Scarlett had been protected by the mysterious owner of the Drunken Moon Hotel. "You are really something, aren't you?" Megan said, the tone of her voice laced with venom. Scarlett didn't say anything. Not only because she had no idea what the bitch was talking about, but also because she enjoyed pissing her off by ignoring her. "You've decided to be with every rich boy in this state. Huh? You've barely broken up with Austin, and you are already coming out of Chris Montgomery's car. Like, slow down, Scar. Don't tarnish our father's name with this slutty behavior of yours." Scarlett just smiled and walked away from them, determined to not give one more second of her time to Megan. She'd barely taken a few steps when someone grabbed her arm. She hissed in pain as her body was violently yanked back, and she stood face to face with a jealous-looking Austin. His eyes spat fire as he spoke. "You wanted to explain yourself yesterday, so why are you not saying anything now? What excuse do you have for coming out of another man's car, huh?" Scarlett didn't say anything, even when Austin shook her body and made her feel like a limp puppet between his hands. His breathing became sharper the angrier he got. "You're so cheap, Scar. So fucking cheap. I must have been blind to not see it. Tell me now, did you fuck that Chris guy?" "Why should I answer your question, Austin?" she calmly asked. "You cheated on me, and you're asking why you should answer my question. You must feel quite insecure right now. I mean, you are not man enough. If I was in your shoes, I would go crazy too, knowing that my girl has been with men that are better looking and wealthier than I will ever be." Austin visibly winced at those harsh words, his left eye twitching. Scarlett wriggled her way out of his hold and stared right back at him with a determined look on her face. I owe you nothing, okay? Our relationship ended yesterday when you chose to listen to the words of a viper instead of mine. Don't you dare ask me who I have fucked. It's none of your business, and may I remind you. You cheated on me first, and I gave you a second chance. You couldn't do the same for me, so really, don't you dare ask me anything at all. She didn't want to show her weakness, but Scarlett's voice broke as she threw her resentment at Austin's face. The pain she'd buried in her soul a long time ago was coming to the surface again. Yes, Austin cheated first, and he did it with Megan. Scarlett could never forget the sight of her fiancé and her best friend kissing in that same white Porsche parked a few feet away. She'd been a fool to have forgiven them after they served her all those pitiful excuses. They manipulated her, and she'd been too dumb to see right through their games. Don't bring up the past, Austin said through gritted teeth. I told you, that was a mistake. What you're doing right now, though, doesn't compare to that. Now, I'm only giving you advice because I still care about you, Scar, believe it or not. That Chris guy is only playing with you. You might be looking for a man better than me, but trust me, you will only be their toy, and they will discard you as soon as they're done. Just shut up, okay? Until when are you going to keep this up? Sleeping around and getting abortions. Scarlett's hands hitched to give him a slap. Do you even know me at all? She asked him. We've dated for 4 years. You should know what I am capable of better than anyone, Austin. Yeah, so I thought until Meg showed me the proofs. The proofs. The proofs. So, you've seen them. Well, not exactly, but please, I would like to see them too. It seems like Megan knows more about my life than I do. Scarlett walked to Megan, who'd been standing on the side, trying to make herself as invisible as possible. Scarlett brought her forward to Austin's side and asked again, Please, let me see those proofs too, Megan. Show me that I slept with all the men in New York City. Austin laughed. Without humor. You're really full of shit, Scarlett, so you want to be more humiliated than you've already been. Okay, suit yourself. Meg, fucking show her the proofs. I want to see the look on her face. Both Scarlett and Austin turned to Megan with expectation, but the young woman remained quiet and frozen in place. She hadn't expected to be put under the spotlight like that. She knew that Austin was the kind of guy who would let jealousy and anger blind him. Just by her words, she'd managed to convince him to break up with Scarlett, but she hoped that he'd never ask to see the actual proof of her betrayal. Not so soon, at least. She'd prepared a few documents about Scarlett's abortions, but of course, they were all forged. It wouldn't take more than a second to reveal her lies to the world, and she was already running out of time. Austin nudged her with urgency, as he didn't like her incriminating silence. Megan, the fuck are you doing? Show her the damn proof. The smug look on Scarlett's face made her cringe. Megan cleared her throat. Listen, I don't know what kind of games you are playing, Scar, but the evidence I have against you can literally ruin your life. You know that. It's fucking illegal to do abortions. Well, Megan, thank you for your concern, but I'm not worried. I know what I've done, and I know that there is nothing I should fear, so please, let me see your so-called evidence. Austin squinted his eyes. He noted the clear confidence of Scarlett and the worried look on Megan's face and started to wonder. Scarlett could possibly not be telling the truth, could she? Was Megan evil enough to lie about something so serious? I won't repeat myself, Meg, he told her in a low, murderous tone. You better show us those proofs now, or I swear to God. I can't. You can't. What do you mean you can't? Megan bit on her lower lip, forcing tears to pool in her eyes. The thing is, I destroyed them all. I couldn't bring myself to ruin my own sister's reputation. Anyone could have stumbled upon those proofs, so I thought it better to just destroy them. I did that for you, Scar. Scarlett laughed while Austin's horrified look only deepened. Megan really felt like running away, but she was cornered and had no choice but to face the consequences of her lies. Ah, what a sweet sister I have, Scarlett said. You care so much about me that you destroyed all the evidence. How convenient, don't you think? And how does that explain the fact that you went around yourself, telling everyone about my dirty secrets that you so diligently destroyed the proofs for, just to protect me? How does that explain that you are now dating my fiancé? I'm really confused, Meg. Megan shook her head and turned to Austin. She tried to hold his hand again, but he moved out of her way. What the fuck is going on? Megan, did you lie to me? Of course not. Stop bullshitting me. You told me you had proof. I do? I did. Megan took a few steps back. Austin was scaring her. It felt like he could punch her in the face at any moment. Lucky for her, just when she thought that she would die in his hands, they all heard the sound of a car stopping nearby. Megan sighed in relief when she recognized her father's vehicle. He immediately stepped out of it and marched toward them in confusion. Megan rushed to bury herself in his arms, tears coating her cheeks. Daddy, what's happening? Dad, Austin is so upset. We just saw Scar getting out of a man's car and it pissed him off. What? Yeah, Chris Montgomery's car. Megan unwrapped her arms around her father and watched him walk to Scarlett. The latter was standing tall on her feet, eyes glinting with defiance. Is that true? Her father asked. Were you in a man's car? Yes, I was. So what? Scarlett didn't get to say more because she saw her father raise his hand, ready to give her a slap. She squeaked and tugged even though she knew she couldn't escape that hit. Except that her father's slap never came down. Surrounded by a heavy silence, Scarlett opened her eyes and gasped when she saw her father's hand mid-air. Someone had grabbed his wrist before he could hit her, and that someone, it was no other than the handsome male escort who, in that moment, looked extremely terrifying. Don't you dare touch her, he said in a murderous tone. The heroine is currently facing a difficult situation and needs your support. Please leave your words of encouragement for her in the comments section. Man holding his wrist. He'd never seen him before and was rather surprised by the anger in his voice. Why would a complete stranger be so overprotective over his daughter? On the other hand, Reich didn't care about the attention he was attracting. Not only were Megan and Austin gaping at him with shock, but he'd also gained the full attention of every person that was walking in and out of the quarry building. He didn't care. All that mattered to him was Scarlett. He threw her father's hand away and wrapped his arm around the young woman's waist, dragging her closer to him. She gasped again, but her lower belly filled with warmth and butterflies. She couldn't deny that there was something very enticing about being in the arms of a strong, fearless, and handsome man like Reich. May I know? Her father said. Who you think you are to stop me from talking to my daughter? Reich's jaw clenched again, as if he was trying to remain calm. It was probably the case. His arm tightened around Scarlett's waist. It appeared to me that you were not simply talking to her, but trying to hit her, which is pretty low coming from a businessman, like yourself. Don't you mind that your employees will see you slap your own daughter in public? The father opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out of it. He looked around and indeed, there were plenty of witnesses who could have seen him in a not-so-flattering image. He gritted his teeth together and flashed a forced smile to everyone who was watching. People tried to hide their curiosity and resumed walking away from the sight. Scarlett leaned closer to Reich. Despite the argument they'd had a few minutes ago, she had to admit that he was the only person she could count on at that moment. Why was he always at the right place and at the right time to save her? She noticed how Austin and Megan were staring at him, and that only boosted her confidence. Indeed, Reich was someone pretty impressive to look at, and being around him made Scarlett feel powerful too. Her father cleared his throat and said to her, "I see you've decided that you'll never stop disappointing me. But fine. You do as you please. I'm going inside." Before leaving, he threw a disappointed look to Austin and Megan as well. The both of them watched him leave, and Megan frowned in worry, wondering why it seemed like her father was angry at her. She hadn't done anything wrong, had she? Let's go inside too, Austin," she said. She tried to hold his hand, but once again, Austin dodged her touch and shivered in what looked oddly like disgust. The man wasn't even looking at her. All his attention was still on Reich, the handsome stranger who was now holding his fiancée. "Who the fuck are you?" he snarled. Reich chuckled, showing his long dimples. He didn't feel the least intimidated by Austin's barks, and that only increased the other's rage. Austin took a few steps forward, so he was standing almost nose to nose with Reich. "I asked you a fucking question." Austin wasn't used to such behavior. Being from an influencing family, he was used to respect. No one dared to rub him the wrong way, but the jerk in front of him wasn't even blinking. He even looked bored, at least until his facial expression changed into a colder one. Austin felt a shiver pass down his back. He hated, knowing that he was the one feeling intimidated now. Scarlett's words came back to him. She'd said that he wasn't man enough and that she knew others who were better looking and more powerful than him. She was certainly referring to this prick in front of him. This prick who wasn't Chris Montgomery. For God's sake, how many men were swirling around her? It was driving him crazy. "You better step back," Reich said in a low tone, "or I will break your fucking nose, Austin Miller." Austin didn't have to be told twice. He stepped back, knowing that Reich was dead serious and could really attack him. And how the fuck did he know his name anyway? Reich pressed on Scarlett's waist to get her attention. She looked up to him and their faces were dangerously close. Her blue eyes met his silver ones, and it was like they were pulling her in, having her locked under a heavy spell. "You come with me?" he asked her. Scarlett unconsciously bit her lower lip, and Reich's eyes fell on her mouth. God, what wouldn't he do to bury his fingers inside her blonde hair, tilt her head back and devour those candy? Like lips, it took a huge amount of willpower to stop himself. "Why?" "Yay." "Let's go," she responded. Reich smiled sweetly. He took her hand, and they walked away without sparing another single glance at Austin and Megan. The latter's face had turned crimson red due to all her envious feelings. Scarlett was literally leaving at the arm of the finest man she'd ever seen, and stupid Austin was gaping at her in a way that only confirmed his feelings. Yet again, Megan felt invisible, just like she always did when Scarlett was around. Her eyes filled with angry tears. "Little slut," Austin breathed out. But his insult towards Scarlett sounded more like a cry. "You wanted proof, right?" Megan told him. "Well, I don't think you need anything more than this, do you?" Austin only made a sound that was like a wounded animal's growl. Watching Scarlett leave at the arm of a complete stranger was definitely all the proof he needed. He tried to soothe his broken pride by telling himself that the man she was with was nothing compared to him. After all, he'd never seen him before, which meant he wasn't part of a wealthy family or one of the successful businessmen in the state. But it was hard to believe to his own words. He knew that the powerful aura surrounding the guy was not one you could fake easily. "Oh my God!" Megan exclaimed, taking Austin out of his thoughts. She was looking at Scarlett and Reich as they got into the same Maybach car as earlier. Now that she had a better look at it, she could tell that it was not Chris Montgomery's car. This one was a limited edition, which meant that it cost probably more than a mansion. She wasn't with Chris earlier. She was with this man, she said to no one in particular. Austin shook his head, and Megan had a look of pure amazement on her face. She hated Scarlett to death, but shit. How did she do it? She breathed out. Where did she get this man from? Scarlett sat in the Maybach car again, and she shared a look with Reich. They both stared at each other in silence before she chuckled without much humor. "Can't believe I'm back in your car again," she mumbled. "Fucking hate my life." Reich didn't say anything. He simply read the girl's expression, knowing that she was trying so hard to control her emotions, but they were stronger than she was. Her eyes began to glitter, but she refused to let her tears flow. Reich clicked his tongue at the sight and started the car. "Why? Are you fighting with yourself, little lady?" Scarlett turned her face to the side, hoping to hide her smile. Why did she like that stupid nickname so much? "I am not fighting," she said after a few seconds. "Yes, you are. Cry. If you want to cry, it's not good to keep your feelings bottled up like this. All right, it doesn't make you weak, and I'm not going to judge you. I cry too sometimes." Scarlett rolled her eyes, but Reich's words had got to her. All it took was one single tear to fall on her cheek, and she lost all control. Scarlett broke down in sobs, face buried in her hands. Reich looked straight ahead to give her some privacy, the car filled with the sound of her sadness. He clenched his jaw again. He had one more thing to add to his list of most hated things: listening to Scarlett's cries. She teared up for a few more minutes, and when she started to sniffle, Reich reached out in his pocket and got his handkerchief out. Scarlett hesitated a bit before she accepted to take it from him. Thanks." She dabbed on her cheeks and opened the rearview mirror to look at herself. She cursed under her breath at the sight of her puffy eyes and swollen, red face. "Don't worry. You're still pretty," Reich smirked. "Stop," Scarlett said in a voice she wanted to sound annoyed. "I'm mad at you, you know." "Why? I should be mad at you. You called me a man whore." "Sorry, but that's what we call a man that sleeps around for money." "This is all your fault. To be honest, my virginity meant everything to me. I wanted my first time to be special, and now I don't even remember it. Megan is going around calling me a slut, and I know I'm not like that. But then, how can I explain that I lost my virginity to a male escort without sounding like a slut?" Scarlett made a small noise when Reich suddenly hit the brake and made her body jolt forward when the car came to an abrupt stop. "Okay, you're really starting to piss me off with that talk," he growled. "For the last time, I'm not a male escort. Instead of blaming me for everything wrong in your life, you should be thanking me. I saved your ass. That guy who wanted to assault you would have spread your naked pictures on the internet, and you'd have become a real slut then. You're lucky. It was me. Oh yes. Should I bow down and kiss your feet? Please forgive my rudeness. I'm forever grateful to you. Thank you for raping me, sir. Thank you so much." Reich's expression became cold in front of Scarlett's ironic tone. "Do you want to know why you've been manipulated by that Megan? It's because you're fucking stupid. I suspected it before, but now I have all the confirmation I need. You're a dumb girl." Scarlett's eyes filled with tears again. Reich felt his heart clench, but his anger was stronger than his desire to hold her to his chest and comfort her. He knew how much his words would sting, but maybe she needed to hear them. "Don't call me stupid," Scarlett hissed. "You don't know anything. Megan was my best friend and I trusted her. I couldn't have guessed what she was planning to do." "Friend, my ass. Are you so retarded that you can't differentiate between a friend and an enemy in disguise? See what I say? You're a stupid. You deserve all the shit that happened to you." Reich regretted those words as soon as he spoke them. He saw that he'd hit a nerve with her. Scarlett shut down immediately, and she leaned deeper in her seat, as if attempting to disappear. Reich wanted to apologize, tell her that he didn't mean it, but he wasn't used to apologizing, and he didn't even know how to do it. Scarlett hugged herself, looking away from him. She was so small and fragile. God, why did he have to say that she deserved what happened to her? He shook his head. Ashamed of himself, Reich fished a cigarette out of his pocket and lit it, hoping that he could smoke his guilt away. Only when he took his second drag did he decide to speak again, but not to apologize. "So, what are you going to do now?" he asked instead, in a softer voice. Scarlett wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "What?" She was confused, wondering what he was talking about. Reich rolled his eyes in exasperation. "I mean, what's your strategy now? How are you going to fight against that girl?" "Well, I wasn't planning on fighting with anybody. Megan already got what she wanted anyway. She took Austin and my father from me, and as heartbreaking it is to have lost them, I'm ready to move on. I won't stoop as low as Megan." Reich scoffed and eyed Scarlett as if she'd grown a second head. "You really think it's over? Just like I said, you are a steent." He swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth when he met her watery eyes, and his heart clenched yet again. Reich groaned and took another drag of his cigarette to calm down. "Okay, listen here. I have not met that girl, but from what you've told me, she's clearly not done with you. She wants to ruin your life. It's as simple as that, and this is only the beginning. Believe me, I'm quite familiar with people like her. Now, doesn't it make you wonder why she decided to reveal herself as your sister all of a sudden?" "I don't think it was her decision. I walked into my father and her mother together, and they had no choice but to reveal the truth." "How do you even know that she's my sister anyway? Are you spying on me?" Reich shook his head. "You guys were pretty loud in the Drunken Moon's restaurant, and I happened to be nearby. I heard her call your father Dad, so the drama in your lives is just crazy. Y'all should have a reality TV show or something." Reich chuckled, but Scarlett didn't find his joke so funny. She was ashamed that a complete stranger knew so much about her life, and only the nastiest parts of it. Not only was he her undesired one-night stand, but he also knew about her cheating father, bitchy half-sister, and idiot ex-fiancé. He'd seen her getting bullied and shamed in public by her family. He even knew that she didn't have a single penny to her name anymore, now that her father had frozen all of her credit cards. Scarlett felt naked and exposed. It was the last thing she needed, on top of all the troubles she already had. "This is annoying, you know," she whispered, not looking at him. "You know everything about me, and I'm still in the dark about you. It's not fair." She looked pitiful, and Reich understood. He would have felt just as terrible if he'd been in the same situation. All he wanted was to show her that she had nothing to worry about, and that he wouldn't use her weaknesses against her. But Reich felt clumsy. To do that, he'd have to figure them out first, which was pretty difficult, especially when it came to Scarlett. He leaned closer and put a hand on her shoulder, but Scarlett shrugged him off as if his touch had burned her. "Don't show up in front of me again," she told him right before she opened the car door and stepped out. Reich cursed under his breath, watching the girl walk away. How unappreciative of her. She had no idea how much effort he was making for her, did she? Sure, they had a rough start to their relationship, but it was just rude to walk away from him like that. He just wanted to help her, but fine, if she didn't want to see him again, he wasn't going to force his way through. His pride had been bruised enough anyway, and he was too great to run after an immature little girl. He wasn't her puppy dog. Reich stomped on the accelerator and drove away and past Scarlett. Yet, despite his better judgment, he couldn't stop himself from looking back at her through the rearview window. God, what had she done to him? In the chairman office of the quarry building, Scarlett's father sat behind his desk, jaw clenched. In front him, there was Austin and Megan, sitting on the couch but maintaining a solid distance between them. Megan could still feel the tension between them. Austin had become doubtful of her. On the other hand, her father's anger and disappointment increased her anxiety. Would he be willing to protect her if Austin turned against her? It didn't seem like it. She was running out of luck and wasn't sure she could keep lying to them about Scarlett. She wiped the perspiration on her forehead and forced a smile when she met her father's eyes. "Where is Scarlett?" he asked her after a long moment of silence. He didn't look at her with affection. Not like a daughter. Not so surprising after all. He only considered Scarlett as his real daughter. He didn't care about her as much as he did for Scarlett, even if he was angry with her at the moment. Megan cleared her throat and hoped that her emotions wouldn't show through her voice. Sorry, Dad. I tried to stop her, but she left with that guy. I don't know where they went off to. I can't believe it," the older man pestered. "My own daughter making a joke out of herself. Who even is that guy she ran off with? I have no idea, first time seeing him. But knowing Scarlett's behavior lately, I would say that it must be a male escort or someone she met at a club or something." Megan almost peed her pants when she saw how her words were affecting her father. He really didn't like to hear anything bad about his favorite daughter. "Why would you think that?" he yelled. "Sure, Scarlett has been behaving strangely, but she wouldn't stoop that low and spend time with a male escort." "Well?" Megan bit on her lower lip and decided to remain quiet. She could tell that her father wouldn't accept any reasoning she'd offer. Yet, something unexpected happened when Austin cleared his throat and spoke out for her. "I think it might be true, Mr. Devons. The guy seemed quite familiar to me, and if I recall well, I've met him before and it was at a club. He is the type of man that makes money by seducing foolish women like Scarlett. He dresses and acts in a way that they'll find attractive, which explains why he was wearing a suit. But yes, no doubt, he is a male escort." Megan looked at Austin, speechless. He'd lied to protect her. She knew for a fact that he never met the guy with Scarlett before. No matter what his motivations were, his comment had helped to convince Scarlett's father. He places his fists over the table, his shoulders shaking with anger. "A male escort," he spat out. "Fine. I will take care of Scarlett myself. I won't let her ruin my reputation. Imagine if the medias get a hold of this story. I will have to meet with her tonight and sort this mess. Once and for all, go home. The both of you. I need to be alone." "Sure," Austin replied. He stood up and walked out of the office, followed closely by Megan. She strolled behind him, trying to find a way to start a conversation, but not finding any. The tension between them was still very palpable in the air. They walked out of the quarry building and stopped near Austin's white Porsche. That's when he finally decided to look at Megan since earlier in the morning. His eyes were dark and void of any emotion. "Why do you think that the guy was a male escort?" he bluntly asked. Megan licked her lips and tried to think of a lie that wouldn't offend Austin. "It just seems obvious, don't you think? A man like that who is not known in our circle can only be an escort." "An escort driving a Maybach car?" Austin raised one eyebrow. "It's clearly not his car. Come on, let me tell you how these things work, Austin. A guy as handsome as that one is definitely a top-class escort, which means that he is surrounded by extremely wealthy women. One of them owns the car and he drives it around to show off." "That's it." Megan smiled when Austin's own lips stretched into a little smirk. He liked the idea. If the guy was really a male escort, it would make him less powerful than he was. But his smug look was short-lived because another annoying thought came to his mind. It would also mean that Scarlett had cheated on him with a pimp. Somehow, that angered him even more than thinking she'd been with another businessman. He clicked his tongue and opened his car's door. He stopped Megan before she could get in after him. "Sorry, but I just remembered that there is something important I need to do at the company. I can't take you with me, so you'll have to go home by yourself." Megan's jaw tightened, but she forced a smile on her face. She already had one foot in the car but had to take it out. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "You go take care of your business and I'll find my way home. Don't mind me." "Yeah. Bye." Austin drove away without sparing her another glance. Megan cursed under her breath. The fucking asshole. How dared he leave her out there all by herself? She fished her phone out of her purse and dialed her mom's number. The latter quickly picked up. Yes, honey. Moom. Megan whined. Oh no. What's the matter? Austin, that fucking jerk. He refused to take me home and left me standing in the middle of the street like an idiot. What? Why? Ugh. I think I might have angered him earlier, but anyway, I'll tell you all about that later. I'm calling you about something more important. I just met with Dad and things happened. I think he's starting to have some doubts about me. He's planning on meeting with Scarlett tonight, and I fear that if they get to talk alone, they'll forgive each other and turn against us. We need a plan. Megan's mother sneered on the other end of the line. She wasn't worried at all. Nothing will happen, Meg. I can promise you that, she said. Mom, I think you don't understand. You know we can never compare to Scarlett, for Dad. She lived with him for more than 20 years, and she's the only daughter he ever knew. She won't even need to try hard to convince him, and if our lies are discovered, we would have worked for nothing. I know your dad, Meg. I can manipulate him with ease, and Scarlett. Don't you worry about her. She's nothing but a stupid, spoiled little princess. She can't fight against us. Megan bit her lower lip. Her mother's words failed to convince her, but she had no choice but to trust her. Let me tell you how we are going to proceed, mother said. I already have a plan to get rid of Scarlett for good. Not only will we destroy the relationship she has with her father, but we will easily make our way into the Devons family and wealth. You will see. Really? Mom? Yes. Just trust me. And to kickstart our plan, I need you to call Scarlett and tell her that you want to meet. Leave the rest to me. All right. Let's give it a go then. Megan thanked her mom and hung up. She called Scarlett immediately after. The young woman clicked her tongue when she saw Megan's name on her phone's screen and refused to pick up. She was still walking down the street without a clear destination in mind. She didn't feel like having another argument, but Megan kept calling again and again. She groaned and decided to answer. What do you want? Hey, Scar. Should we brunch together? Excuse me, Megan sighed. I want to meet you. And why would I want to meet you? Scarlett said. I have something important to tell you. I don't think there is anything you can tell me that will be important to me, Megan. Well, you're wrong, there is. I wouldn't miss this opportunity if I was you. Come to that cafe near Dad's office. You know which one. I will even pay for your brunch. I know you don't have any money right now. Unless you are scared of meeting with me anyway. I will understand if that's the case. Scarlett laughed bitterly. Megan knew her too well. She knew she could never back down from a dare, even if it was a stupid one. Fine. I will be there in 20. She hung up and turned around, walking toward the café, where she used to hang out with Megan before, when she was blind enough to consider her a friend. She wondered what she wanted to tell her, and if it was a good idea to meet her. It could as well be another trap she was walking herself into. Scarlett arrived at the cafe a few minutes earlier than she'd expected. She was finding out a lot of things about herself lately, and one of them was that she was a good walker. Her gym subscription was paying off after all. Maybe she should be walking more often. With those thoughts in mind, she passed through the glass doors and was immediately greeted by a young waitress who recognized her because Scarlett was a regular at the cafe. They exchanged a smile. Good morning, Miss Devons. Are you here for Miss Hale? Yes. Is she here already? Yes, she is. Follow me. So Megan was early too. Scarlett followed the waitress to the back of the cafe, where there were booths in which people could meet in private. The waitress showed which booth Megan was in and left after Scarlett thanked her. The young woman then walked to it, and the closer she got, the more she doubted her decision to come here. Knowing how manipulative Megan could be, She shouldn't be surprised if this was nothing more than another scheme to get her in trouble. But Scarlett convinced herself that she came prepared and that there was nothing Megan could do to surprise her. Yet, when she got close enough to the booth, she heard two voices coming from there, even though she expected that Megan would meet her alone. "Try that one, Mom. It must be the best tiramisu cake I ever had in my life. Oh heavens, it's delicious." Scarlett frowned. Megan had brought her mother to their meeting. But why? She leaned closer and pressed her ear against the door. She was going to eavesdrop on them, and maybe they'd give out a piece of information that she could use against them later. Like, "I know I'm on a diet and stuff, but I could literally eat 3 of these in one sitting," Megan was saying, her voice over-dripping with amusement. "You have to stop me if I go overboard, Mom. Eat as much as you wish, honey." Her mother laughed. "You can afford to have a few extra kilos if you're rich, and rich we are going to be, Meg." You are actually right. Soon enough, we will be officially part of the Devons family, and we won't have to worry about money anymore. Dad will soon let us move in with him, and then you and I can visit all of New York's coffee shops and eat as much cake as want. Oh, Meg, I cannot wait. There are so many things I'm looking forward to, so many great experiences I want to have with you. You know, all my life, I've been envious of other women living the way I could only dream of. Take Alicia, for example. She married the man I always had my eyes set on. He made her a queen, covered her in gold and silver. She even had an army of servants ready to tend to her every need. But the thing is, she stole that life from me. For years I thought I would never get it back, but see, life is fair. I waited until now, but in the end, everything she took is coming back to us. Yes, Mom, soon you will move into that house and everything will be yours. Exactly. Imagine all we can do with Alicia's jewelries. I heard that she has tons of diamonds. Must be worth a lot of money. Scarlett listened to Megan's and her mother's cackling. She was completely baffled by their shamelessness and greed. So not only were they going to force their way into the Devons family, but they were also going to rob them blind of all their wealth. Scarlett thought that she would have to die first before she let any of them get a hold of her mother's jewelries. "I hope you will share," Megan said in an amused tone. "I think diamonds will look good on me, don't you agree?" "Of course, baby. You deserve more than diamonds, and that's what you will get. But I'm still worried about Scarlett, though. What if she does something to ruin our plan?" "Oh, Meg, it's silly to worry about Scarlett. You know, she is exactly like her mother. She's just as stupid. See how Alicia was blind enough to not notice that her husband was cheating on her with me while they were married. Any other woman with common sense would have noticed, but she's as dumb as they come. Her daughter is not different." Scarlett had heard enough. She was okay with the insults and low blows when they were addressed to her. What she couldn't stand, though, was have her mom's name thrown in the dirt by Megan and her witch of a mother. She slammed the door of the booth, opened, and met the shocked faces of her archenemies. To think that they were sitting there, enjoying tea and cakes while planning on stealing her family's wealth. It made Scarlett's blood boil. Her eyes immediately zeroed on Megan's mother, who she hated the most. "Don't you dare speak my mother's name ever again." Scarlett marched toward her so quickly that Megan's mother feared for her life and stood up so she could defend herself if needed. Scarlett was losing her control again. She's always been short-tempered, but lately, it had gotten worse. Worryingly worse. "You," Megan's mother breathed out. "When did you come? I've been here long enough to hear your disgusting conversation. You've been eavesdropping. I had no choice but to, seeing how loudly and shamelessly you spoke about my family." Megan jumped to her feet as well and yelled back, "Scarlett, if you have a problem, you should solve it with me. Don't scream at my mother. If you didn't want her to get screamed at, you should have stopped her from bad-mouthing my mom." Megan lunged forward, but her mother grabbed her arm to stop her. She had a smug look on her face, one that made Scarlett shake with rage at her insolence. The older woman was clearly set on pissing her off. "Why are you so angry, Scar?" She chuckled. "Is it because all I said was true? I don't think I did anything wrong, and it's well past time that you open your eyes and accept the truth. Your mother wasn't only stupid. She was also a bitch who stole a boyfriend from me. She should have known that karma would hit her one day or the other. Her death was highly deserved." Scarlett could have committed murder right then. In fact, she decided to do it, not caring about the consequences of her actions. Spending the rest of her life in jail would be nothing compared to the satisfaction of making Megan's mother pay for those words. Yet, she'd barely moved toward her that the older woman took a step back and lost her balance. It was like an invisible hand had shoved her back. She stumbled on her legs, letting out a short scream before she fell. It could have been fine if her head hadn't hit the corner of the coffee table in the process. Megan and Scarlett squealed, the latter covering her mouth with both hands and her eyes widening. She was suddenly reminded of that day at Megan's apartment when she caught her father inside Megan's mother's bedroom. She'd also pushed her back that day, but her fall was nothing compared to this one. This one was far worse. The woman had lost consciousness, and the side of her face was covered in blood. Scarlett stood stunned. Megan was screaming at her, but she couldn't focus on any of her words. All she could think was that she'd barely touched the woman. She'd barely touched her. "You killed my mother," Megan was saying. Scarlett shivered, looking at the still body on the ground. Was she really dead? A minute ago, she thought that the woman deserved to die for her insolence, but now that things had gotten scarily real, Scarlett had changed her mind. She wouldn't wish death on her worst enemy ever again, and she especially didn't want to be framed as a murderer when she wasn't guilty. The sight of blood almost made her faint as well. She didn't notice Megan grabbed the very hot and very heavy teapot on the table. "You've done it," she screeched. "This time, I won't let you go easily." Scarlett turned to her with a tearful gaze, just in time to see Megan raise both of her hands holding the teapot. Scarlett didn't think of moving out of the way, but her body reacted on its own. Her legs could barely stay up after the sight of blood. She managed to fall back on one of the couches, and shortly avoided being hit straight on the face by the teapot. Megan had clearly planned to disfigure her and missed by one strand of hair. The heavy pot broke to the ground with an ear-splitting crash. Hot coffee splashed everywhere, including on Scarlett and Megan's mother, who was still knocked out on the floor. Scarlett screamed in agony when the burning beverage hit her feet and hands. That was enough to alert the cafe's staff, and they quickly rushed to the booth, taking in the mess that had happened. Scarlett was a spectator as they called an ambulance and started rushing Megan's mother out of there. Then, someone took her arm as gently as possible. It was a young waiter. "Please, follow me, miss. We will take you to the hospital." Scarlett gave a faint nod, and the waiter helped her up and walked her to the door. Somewhere from behind her, she could hear Megan, still cursing at her, until her voice became hoarse. She was calling someone? "Dad, hurry up! Mom had an accident and is being taken to the hospital. Scarlett happened. She attacked her, and now Mom is covered in blood." Maybe this was the last straw. Nothing could save her relationship with her father. Now, Scarlett thought. Scarlett's father was shocked to hear those words from Megan. He was in the midst of an important meeting with a partner, but had to cut it short and let him continue with his assistant. During his ride to the hospital, he couldn't help but grumble, knowing that he'd most likely lose that contract. All because of Scarlett again. He arrived half an hour after Megan had called him and went inside the hospital, asking for Joyce. A nurse directed him to the right room, on the second floor. He'd expected to find Megan's mother in a pitiful state, maybe even in a coma. Yet, when he opened the door to the room she was in, he was met with something different. Joyce was sitting on the bed in a hospital gown, and a doctor was standing next to her, ticking boxes on his tablet. Scarlett's father squinted his eyes. Joyce had a bandage around her head and feet. But except for that, she seemed to be perfectly fine. She even had a smile on her face, but it quickly disappeared when he came in. He noted how her expression changed to become one of pain. "Dad," Megan whined. "You're here finally. I came as quickly as I could. Is she okay, doctor?" Megan's mother scowled, upset that he wasn't asking her directly. The doctor explained that she'd lost a bit of blood, but nothing too drastic. Fortunately, he also mentioned that the woman had burns on her legs from the hot coffee. They take a few weeks to heal completely, but again, nothing too terrible. Scarlett's father thanked him and waited until the doctor was gone to turn toward Megan. He hissed, "What's wrong with you? You made me leave work early and come here for this." Megan gasped. "Dad, don't you see how serious this is? You heard the doctor. He said that your mother will be fine. I have entirely wasted my time here." "Okay, Dad, you're making me very upset right now. Do you call this a waste of time? My mother has been sent to the hospital by Scarlett. Yes, she's quite lucky because her injuries could have been much worse than this. Your precious daughter attacked her and now she has a wound on her head and burns all over her feet, and you say that you've wasted your time. Look at this." Megan picked up her mother's clothes and showed them to her father. They'd been completely ruined by the coffee. The man grunted under his breath and asked, "This is Scarlett's doing?" "Yes." Megan answered without a moment of hesitation, knowing that she was the one who poured the coffee down. "Tell me what happened." "From the beginning. After I left your office this morning, I decided to have a coffee with Mom, and we went to this place near the quarry building. I don't know how Scarlett discovered that we were there. She came in like an animal and threatened my mother, asking her to stay away from you and calling her names. Monday only tried to defend herself and respond back, but Scarlett went absolutely insane. She hit my mother in the face, and I definitely think that she was trying to disfigure her, maybe so you wouldn't look at her anymore. And then Scarlett poured coffee on her. Mom barely escaped. While Megan spoke in a high-pitched voice, her mother kept her head down, sobbing. Megan's father stared at her injuries and could imagine Scarlett doing all those horrible things. "Where is she?" he asked in a low voice. "She's here too. Room 413, getting treatment, but I know she didn't suffer nearly as much as us. Dad, I hope you will be fair. I know Scarlett is your favorite daughter, but what she did today was terribly wrong and you must let her know." "No, please." Megan's mother whined in a fake act meant to draw pity. "Don't turn your father against Scarlett, Meg. She's just so angry, but she's not a bad person. She made a mistake. I'm not going to file a complaint against her." "You're too kind, Mom. If I were you, I would never let this go unpunished. Scarlett needs to be taught a lesson she will never forget." Joyce turned to Megan's father. "Darling, don't listen to Meg. She's angry as well. Just go and talk some sense into Scarlett, okay?" The man didn't reply. He just shook his head and walked out of the room with rage. He definitely did not notice the sly looks on Megan and her mother's face as soon as he had his back turned. Their plan had worked perfectly. Scarlett, on the other hand, had figured out why she'd been invited to that café in the first place. It had been a trap. She should have listened to her gut feeling and not go there. How stupid was she to keep throwing herself in the lion's den? That stupid male escort was right to call her dumb. She knew for a fact that she hadn't touched Megan's mother. The woman fell back on her own, as if she wanted to get hurt. It wasn't her fault. She hissed when the nurse applied ointment on the burns she had on her hands. He gave her an apologetic smile and finished fixing her up, just in time for Scarlett's father to come in. The young woman sighed, knowing that this wasn't going to end well. Her father was pissed and wouldn't hear anything she had to say. Sensing the danger in the air, the nurse left quickly, and Scarlett's father snarled with irony. "Great job, young lady. Dad, don't start. Okay? I'm hurt too if you haven't noticed. And whatever happened to that woman was in no way my fault. She fell on her own and hit her head against the table. It was all done on purpose, if you ask me. Scarlett also wanted to tell him about Megan, who'd thrown that fucking teapot at her. That was the actual attack. But of course, her father wouldn't listen. He'd made up his mind with all the events from the previous hours, and Scarlett looked extremely guilty in his eyes. To him, she was the one who attacked Megan's mother and was now trying to free herself of all responsibility. The man was so disappointed, his hand itched with the desire to slap his daughter's face. Scarlett could tell as well, but her father didn't hit her, almost as if he was too disgusted to even touch her. She would have cried if she could, but she'd become void of tears. Plus, what would be the point of crying in front of a man that clearly saw her as a monster? "You're a complete disappointment," he said. "I wish you were not my daughter, and I wish you were not my father," he snapped. The slap hit Scarlett's face so fast, she didn't even see it arrive. Half of her face went numb and she held her cheek with a trembling hand. Her father immediately regretted his action. But Scarlett didn't care. This was the third time that her father had attempted to hit her. He'd never been violent with her before. "You let me down," she said in a dull tone. "You chose them over me, Dad. One day, when the truth will finally come out, you will think back to this exact moment and you will have so many regrets, and it will be too late to set this right again." "I won't have a single regret, Scar. You will, though. If you've not completely lost your mind yet, you will listen to this advice. Megan's mother has decided to not file a complaint against you. She's being reasonable, and you should take this occasion and go apologize to." "I'd rather fucking die, Dad. I will never apologize to that wretched woman." "So you don't want to make any effort, huh? Well, I don't have a daughter who lies and hurts others just because she wants to throw a fit. If you don't want to apologize to her, you won't be part of my family anymore." "Fine. I'm not scared, Dad. Even without you, without your money, I will survive. I will support myself." Scarlett stared right at her father with determination in her eyes. The older man could tell that she was very serious, but Scarlett had taken her stubbornness from him. He wasn't going to back down from his decision either, even though his heart clenched when he spoke these words. "Fine, Scarlett, I see that you've made up your mind. From now on, I cut you off. Don't you dare come back to me when you'll be in trouble." Scarlett smiled sadly. She grabbed her purse on the bed and looked at her father one last time. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you for this." She turned and walked out of the room. Her breathing was hard and heavy as she walked down the corridor, but she promised herself to not cry yet, not when she risked running on Megan and her mother. She needed to stay strong. She stopped in front of the elevator, wrapped around herself and shoulders, trembling. When the automatic doors opened, she tried to get in but noticed that someone was already coming out of the elevator. What a surprise she had when she looked up and saw Reich. The male escort stood in front of her, the same stunned look on his face. She opened her mouth to ask what he was doing there, but Scarlett feared that her voice would sound too weak if she spoke. He, on the other hand, focused on Scarlett's swollen cheek where he could see the traces of fingers. Without thinking, he walked toward her and held her jaw between two fingers, turning her head to the side. His eyes filled with fury when he had the confirmation that indeed someone had slapped her. "Who did this?" he asked through gritted teeth. Scarlett's lower lip wobbled. Reich's touch on her chin felt like the most gentle thing ever after the rough days she had. Plus, looking up at him, she could see that he was really concerned about her, even if he was nothing more than a stranger. Seeing someone care for her, protect her, and trust in her no matter what. Reich saw it all in her eyes. He passed his thumb slowly over the tender spot on her cheek. What he truly wanted to do was lean down and kiss her pain away. Seeing Scarlett like that was too much. "Who did it?" he asked again in a softer voice. Scarlett just shook her head, and the wall she was trying to put around her heart came crumbling down. She could not be strong, not in front of this guy's sweet eyes anyway. She She broke down in tears and he brought her smaller body against his chest. He'd held a few women between his arms before, but none of them had made his heart flutter as much as Scarlett did. Just by burying herself in him, trusting him completely. Seeing Scarlett cry was torture for Reich, but there was one positive thing about it. He got to hold her close to his chest. In her moment of vulnerability, Scarlett was no longer defensive and rude. She became just a simple girl, looking for a bit of affection. It somehow reminded him of the Scarlett he met in that hotel room, heavily drugged, sure, but still, she'd been fun and nice. Reich missed that side of her and longed to see it again. She cried long and hard. When people started to look at them way too often, Reich took her inside the elevator and pressed the ground floor. Scarlett didn't look up once, her face still buried in his chest while he held her by the waist. His shirt would be ruined. He knew that for a fact. It soaked in all her tears, to the point where it felt like Reich had been under the rain. That would have annoyed him under any other circumstances, but once again, everything was different when it came to Scarlett. He took her out of the hospital and she didn't complain, probably because she wasn't looking at where they were going anyway. She only did when they reached the car and Reich opened the door to let her in. Scarlett frowned, noting that the Maybach car from this morning was gone, and instead there was a brand new Bentley in front of her. She got in and waited for him to do the same. "Another borrowed car?" she asked as soon as he sat behind the wheel. "Yes," Reich replied in a slightly annoyed voice. He gave her another handkerchief, and she used it to wipe her tears away. Despite how grateful she was to him, Scarlett couldn't stop herself from thinking that he was rather shameless. He took bluntly from women without a single ounce of guilt. A Maybach car in the morning and now a Bentley. Seriously, how many rich women were swirling around him? He should have been embarrassed of making a living that way. And yet, he flaunted it with pride. To receive so much money and privileges, he must have been doing awful things with those women. The car took off, and Reich looked a few times at Scarlett's face, wondering what she was thinking about. He got a little shy when she turned and met his eyes. Reich cleared his throat and said the first words that his mind had to offer. "Look at you. It must be true when people say that women are mostly made of water. You must have cried all the tears in your body. Right now, my shirt is completely ruined, and so is your face. You look pathetic." Scarlett felt her anger rise again. She threw the handkerchief at him, and it landed on his lap when she was actually aiming for his face. "It's just a shirt. Okay, that doesn't give you the right to insult me." But as she said those words, Scarlett looked at his silky shirt and realized that it probably cost a lot of money, more than she had. In fact, she was penniless and would be more embarrassed if the man asked him to pay for the mess she'd made with her tears. Luckily he didn't. "Just tell me what happened in that hospital," he said instead. But Scarlett was still in a stubborn mood. "I won't tell you," she snarled, crossing her arms over her chest. "Ah, well, you don't have to. I can guess you know. You've probably been bullied by your half-sister again, haven't you? I mean, that's not surprising at all to me. What makes me wonder, though, is that you've been crying as if that could solve all your issues. What's the point of bawling your eyes out if you're not going to do something and fight back? What is the purpose of having a brain inside your pretty little head?" Scarlett sighed in frustration. The guy hadn't changed at all, huh? He still had a foul mouth and was determined to make her feel terrible about herself. Yet, the idea of stepping out of his car again was not as appealing as it was in the morning. Now, she kind of needed him. A lot. She had nowhere to go, and he was the only person that remotely cared about her. So she stayed sat, but made sure to show him how upset she was, through the frown on her face. Not fighting back was quite effective, because he was less aggressive when he spoke again. "Just tell me, okay? I want to help you." She looked at him and saw the sincerity in his eyes. She was convinced that he was telling her the truth and right in that moment. She was in need of all the help she could get. So she told him everything that had happened since they parted in the morning. Reich listened without interrupting her once, until she was done. It seemed like he was driving around without a clear destination in mind. So you've let that stupid sister of yours manipulate you again. You should have known to not go to that cafe. You are lucky. You didn't end up disfigured and locked up in jail. I know. You don't need to make me feel worse than I already do. Fine. So, what are you going to do now? I have no idea. What I won't do, though, is apologize to those bitches. Dad literally chose to defend them instead of me. He said that I'm no longer his daughter, and that he cuts me off until I apologize to them, but that will never happen. I will survive. I already have a job to support myself. Whoa, how noble of you, Reich said in a sarcastic tone. So you will just let your half-sister and her mother move into your home and take everything that belongs to you. You will let them steal your life just like that. What? You want me to go and apologize to them? Make a fool of myself. I didn't ask you to apologize. I just want you to realize that you're not as helpless as you think. It's too easy if you let them get away with everything they've done to you. You must fight back. Fighting for what? Scarlett whispered in a sad tone. That's not even my money. It's my father's and he doesn't want me anymore. I don't want to return to his house. I'd rather give Megan everything than be dependent of my father again. Huh? Reich sighed. You're really naive. You better know that those people who hurt you won't stop at nothing until they completely ruin you. It won't do if you just decide to live on your own and support yourself. They will still look for a way to hurt you. Plus, you're a little princess. You're used to wealth. It's really cute that you think you can survive out there on your own, but believe me, it's going to be tough. Sometimes, it's even going to feel like hell. Scarlett took in those words and knew that the man was being truthful. Life was probably going to be insufferable for her, but what other choice did she have? She really didn't want to return to her father and beg. I will figure it out, she said, more to herself. I will be fine. I'm stronger than I look. I can live without monthly allowances, expensive dinners, and weekly shopping. I can. As long as I have food and a place to sleep at night, I will be fine. She didn't notice the little smirk on Reich's face as he listened to her. She was too cute for her own good, and no way was he going to let her survive on her own. He wanted to keep Scarlett close for a little while, at least until he gets bored of her, which will eventually happen. He's convinced of it. Come stay with me, he suddenly offered. Stay with you? Scarlett gasped. He nodded. Her mouth fell open. She hadn't expected him to say something like that. What would it be like to live with a male escort? Would he bring clients at home? Scarlett cringed at the thought of hearing him have sex somewhere in the house while she'd be locked up in her room. It made a cold shiver run down her back. Or worse. What if he tried something funny with her? He slept with her once, claiming that he couldn't control his urges. What if it happened again? Sure, he was handsome, and sometimes Scarlett wondered what his body looked like under his clothes. But she wasn't going to have sex with a male escort again. Did she trust him enough to stay with him? What if this was another ruse he planned? With Megan, Reich was now getting upset, seeing how long she was hesitating. Okay. Fine, he grunted. Don't torture yourself. If you don't want to stay with me, you don't have to. Where do I drop you off? No, wait, Scarlett squeaked, knowing that she didn't have another option anyway. Okay, I will stay with you, but I will pay rent, and you won't be allowed inside my room. Reich cocked one eyebrow. You don't think that I'll fuck you again, do you? Don't flatter yourself. That first time was a mistake. Okay, I wouldn't have touched you that night if you didn't push me to. Okay, shut up, Scarlett scoffed, looking out of the window. Reich suppressed an amused smile, noting that she was suddenly embarrassed and didn't want to be reminded of her behavior that night. He, on the other hand, had it replaying in his mind all day. Maybe she'd be like that with him again someday. He took his phone out and called his secretary to arrange an apartment for her. He has been staying at the Drunken Moon Hotel since his return from Europe, and it would not be appropriate to take Scarlett to his suite. He couldn't take her to his family mansion either, and expose her to his entire family's venom. The best thing to do was arrange a brand new apartment for her. His assistant, Mr. Goldwyn, was able to do it in around 20 minutes. He called back and gave his boss the address of the apartment. Scarlett watched with an open mouth, wondering how come a male escort had an assistant. What a mystery this man was. She didn't even know his name, and she suddenly wondered, what was he doing in the hospital earlier? He was there at the right moment, almost as if he knew she'd be there. He could possibly not be stalking her. Could he? She didn't ask. He was taking her to the apartment complex where she'd be staying, and Scarlett thought that she'd have another opportunity to get to know him better. The apartment was in Soho, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in NYC. It was a nice place with 2 master bedrooms, a study, and an open kitchen. The decoration was to Scarlett's taste, and the entire place was immaculate. A smile spread on her face as she toured the apartment, Reich following close behind. She opened the fridge in the kitchen and sulked when she saw that it was empty. She'd need to buy some groceries later. Her smile came back when she turned to Reich, who was waiting for her opinion. "How do you like it, little princess?" he asked. "It's beautiful," she admitted, but then she was worried about the rent. An apartment like that in Soho was definitely going to cost her an arm. She couldn't afford it for sure. Reich leaned over the counter. She was standing right behind it, and suddenly his face was too close to hers and she started to blush. His silver eyes were pulling her in and she found it difficult to look away. "What are you thinking about?" he asked her. I'm just wondering. How much are you going to charge me for rent?"